Board of County Commissioners acts as a quasi-judicial body when it hears requests for rezoning and conditional use permits. Applicants must provide competent, substantial evidence establishing facts or expert witness opinion testimony showing that the request meets the zoning code and comprehensive plan criteria. Opponents must also testify as to facts or provide expert testimony whether they like or dislike a request is not competent evidence. The board must then decide whether the evidence demonstrates consistency and compatibility with the comprehensive plan and the existing rules in the zoning ordinance, property adjacent to the property to be rezoned, and the actual development of the surrounding area. The board cannot consider speculation, non-expert opinion testimony, or poll the audience by asking those in favor or opposed to stand up or raise their hands. If a commissioner has had communications regarding a rezoning or conditional use permit request before the board, the commissioner must disclose the subject of the communication and the identity of the person, group, or entity with whom the communication took place before the board takes action on the request. Likewise, if a commissioner has made a site visit, inspection, or investigation, the commissioner must disclose that fact before the board takes action on the request. Each applicant is allowed a total of 15 minutes to present their request, unless time is extended by majority vote of the board. The applicant may reserve any portion of the 15 minutes for rebuttal. Other speakers are allowed 5 minutes to speak. Speakers may not pass their time to someone else in order to give that person more time to speak.
Good evening, and I want to welcome everybody to the December 6th Planning and Zoning meeting. And with that, it's 5 o'clock, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I would just ask everyone to bow their heads in a moment of silence. Commissioner Smith?
Please stand and follow me with the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have no minutes for approval or resolutions or anything on consent. I don't have any public comment cards at this time, so we're going to...
One item on consent?
Oh, we do have one item on consent. Oh, I apologize. County Manager? Yeah.
This is the Massey Settlement Agreement. It is basically in line with the executive session authorization. I think you all have copies and have had an opportunity to review.
I make a motion to approve it.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pritchett, second by Commissioner Lober. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're going to move straight into public hearings. I've moved some things on the agenda because we have a few people that have some extenuating circumstances, as well as people that have to travel out of town, and they put in notice and asked and requested. So we're going to go ahead with item number 1, and then we're going to move to item number 8. So I'll remind the board when we get there, but item number 1.
The first item before you is a request by Kimberly Colea Angelillo, represented by Rodney Honeycutt, requesting a change of zoning classification from BU1 to BU2. This property is 1.53 acres in size, located on the northwest corner of Highway 1 and MacArthur Circle in District 1.
Mr. Honeycutt?
Good evening. Rodney Honeycutt, 3700 South Washington Avenue in Titusville. We're requesting a rezoning for this site from BU1 to BU2. The site is for coastal septic. They're on the same side of US 1, but on the opposite side of the the side road now, and they're leasing the property, and they're moving because they're purchasing and building a new building. And the reason we have to rezone the BU2 is so they can have outdoor storage of their vehicles overnight.
Okay.
So, any questions?
Commissioner Pritchett?
Yes, ma'am. This is, I believe, a good project for the district, and I'm in full approval of it. So with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
I have a motion by Commissioner Pritchett. Second by Commissioner Tobias. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And now we're going to move item number 8 up the agenda, and that's a public hearing regarding WK and R Groves. Chad Giannone.
This is a request for a change of zoning classification from AU to SR with a binding development plan. The property is 110.97 acres in size, located on the north side of East Crisipoli Road in District 2.
Good evening, Chairman Isnardi, members of the County Commission. My name is Kim Rozenka. I'm with the law firm of Cantwell and Goldman in Cocoa, Florida. I'm here representing Chad Giannone, who is the applicant for this matter through Beachland Managers LLC. The owner of the property is WK and R Groves, Inc. With me tonight is Chad Giannone and the engineer of record, Rick Kearns, who will answer any questions you may have. They don't plan to give a presentation, but if you have questions, especially as to drainage or sewer, Mr. Kearns can answer those questions. This is a 111-acre parcel of AU lands off of East Crisipoli Road. Mr. Giannone wishes to develop this into Island Forest Preserve subdivision with 110 units. It has a future land use of residential 1, which all around it is residential 1. And we're requesting an SR zoning with a binding development plan to keep the use consistent with the other 1 acres, the RR ones around it. This will allow flexibility due to some wetland constraints and some trees that they wish to preserve. The BDP requires 1 unit to the acre, so that's why it is compatible. And for the developer to bring sewer to the project. The binding development plan, there's 2 in there. The last one was revised 2 weeks ago, and so he has to bring sewer wherever the nearest connection point is, not just from State Road 3. As you'll remember, Mr. DeMena is planning to bring sewer up through SR3, State Road 3, but if that doesn't happen, he still is required to bring sewer to the project as a condition of development. He also intends to have large stormwater ponds for additional stormwater storage. This is not in the, I can't get it right, Joe Mayer says this all the time, the estuarine floodplain, so we don't have extra compensatory storage requirements, but he does want to have extra water just for those 100-year storms when they do occur, which seems to be more frequently. The flag portion will have the entranceway, and it will be a preserve area, as you'll recall from the concept plan in your packet. The rezoning, this is only the rezoning, so we don't have a full traffic study, we don't have an engineering for retention, we don't have engineered plans for the sewer lines, and we don't have a full analysis of the natural resources concerns, and those are all things that will be done at the site plan level. Many residents have raised issues regarding those matters. That's why I point that out in advance, because I'm sure you'll hear them again tonight. The rezoning worksheet in your packet states that this request is consistent with the land use regulations, maintains acceptable levels of service, and does not change the level of service on State Road 3. The can't even read my writing. The land use compatibility section of that worksheet is incorrect as to the trends in density. They said there's been a decrease in density in North Merritt Island, and that is not correct. That goes back to the 1992 small area study and comp plan changes that happened 3 years after it all went into place just to right size. The trends have been to increase density in North Merritt Island. There's been 8 rezonings in the last 4 years, and they've all increased density, and actually most of them are way lower than SR. Most of them are EU or smaller lots. The small area study was not approved by County Commission. As you'll recall, you wanted to wait to find if there was any support for that request to change the future land use. As to the transportation traffic section of the worksheet, this is a stated concern of the residents, but when you listen to the residents, their concern is more about the speed on East Crisafulli Road and the accidents that have happened. That's not something my client can control. There's only about 165 parcels on East Crisafulli Road, not even homes, and so there's not a large amount of traffic on East Crisafulli Road, but my client will have to do a traffic analysis study before any permitting is done. So traffic is not an issue on East Crisafulli Road. The residents have complained about traffic on State Road 3. Again, the level of service on State Route 3 will not be impacted. The maximum acceptable trips on State Road 3 in this area is 41,790. The actual trips are 15,219. So there is not a traffic problem on State Road 3. Under the environmental constraints of the Natural Resources Report in your packet, it states scrub jays and tortoises may be present. We don't know. It's possible based upon the maps in the systems. But Mr. Giannoni would tell you there are no scrub jays on that property. As to the wetlands and the soils, my client will be required to do a environmental assessment report at the permitting stage, but we're still at rezoning. And as to the floodplains, this is again a comp plan and ordinance issue and a site plan issue because there are things to deal with floodplains. The binding development plan maintains the 1 unit to the acre consistency with what's around it, and the sewer language is beneficial to the community so you don't have septic tanks. And it's an environmental issue. It's better to have sewer than 50 septic tanks. There's no issue with school concurrency. The report states that there is sufficient capacity for total projected student membership, and that's stated on page 3 of the report. Importantly, what I'd like to bring to your attention is the packet I submitted to P&Z on October 22nd. It looks like this. It's in your packet. In that packet, and just so you don't have to flip through, the most important thing is the only subdivision on East Crisafulli Road and the density chart, and I'll pass that out from that packet. And again, it's already in the record, but just so you didn't have to flip through your computer to find it or your paper if you have a book. The Broadacres plat that I'm providing to you is a 1964 plat. There are approximately 53 homes in Broadacres. It is to the east and the south of this proposed area. I mean, just to the east. It's a long strip. It abuts East Crisafulli Road. That's their only access. There are approximately 53 homes. Most of the lots are smaller than 1 acre. They're usually about 0.83 to 0.87. There are some larger lots, but that was the average. And there is a letter of objection and pictures from a resident in Broadacres, Mary Watkins, and she lives in Broadacres, the most easterly along Crisafulli Road. On the back page, again, this is the only subdivision, so this is what is only consistent at 1 unit to the acre, or a little less than 1 unit to the acre. And there's no buffering, no wetlands. I mean, there's nothing but a strip of houses. So this will be a fully developed subdivision with amenities, with buffering, with trees, with ponds, none of which this subdivision has from 1964. On the back side of that page is the density comparison chart. We began this in 2014 with Egrets Landing. Joe Mayer was actually the original writer of this, and I've added to it to reflect the Crisafulli townhomes, the Harvey Groves, the Nahaja Inc., I never say that right, Noel Drawers property. And then there's one other in here as well. That's a new one. I don't have the date on. Oh, back here, Egrets Landing. So again, these have been RA24, EU2, EU, and EU2. Also in the packet, I provided you the 4 rezonings that were done this year. And that was the Old Mission Estates on Hall Road, which was zoned to PUD. The Crisafulli property on Hall Road, which was zoned to EU. The Grand Lake Estates, which was rezoned to SR. That's on Chase Hammock Road. And then the Demena property on North Courtney was rezoned to EU. So that is the trend in North Merritt Island. Also in your packet was a map of the area, and it showed where Mary Watkins' house was. But what's important is the distance, and you can see it on the site plan. There's 1,800 feet before you even get to any homes from East Crisafulli Road. So there's substantial buffering to this project just by the entranceway. And because that will be a preserve area, there will be many trees, so I'm not sure anyone will even know there's a subdivision there except for the sign. As you know, we've been through North Merritt Island Independent Special District Board twice. We've been through P&Z twice due to a notice issue. At the October 11th North Merritt Island Board meeting, they wanted detailed site data, detailed engineered plans, and because they are concerned about density, they're concerned about flooding. But those aren't the issues here, and this is a high-level property. It's not really in a flood zone, it's in a flood zone, but it's in a flood zone that's not detrimental for development. They worried about the hookup to sewer, they don't want an increase in density, and they were worried about traffic. At the November 8th meeting, we did not attend due to conflicts, and we did not believe that their opinions would change. We let them know that we weren't going to appear, but in reviewing the minutes, they were concerned about the cost of the sewer and the cumulative effect of these new homes that have been approved for development in North Merritt Island. At the Planning and Zoning Board meeting on October 22nd, 2018, the issue was mainly how the developer could install sewer. One of the members estimated that it would cost millions of dollars, where Mr. Kearns said it would only be $600,000, and Mr. Kearns is the engineer of record. Calculating it out, it might be as much as $700,000, including the lift station. But again, if you're putting in the high-end septic systems at $15,000 to $20,000, this is a more reasonable, and it's better for the community, better for the environment to have sewer. Some of the residents were concerned that they would have to hook up, and that was another reason they didn't want sewer coming down their road. Again, the sewer is a developer's problem. If he can't put it in, he can't build. But he's willing to put it in, and again, we'd ask that you give him that chance. At the November 19th Planning and Zoning Board meeting, again, there was more questions about the sewer. There was an issue that came up about a utility easement. I mistakenly said there was a sewer utility easement or a water utility easement, when in actuality, there is a water line along the south end of the road, along the south side of the road, and Cocoa Utilities is looking for that easement for us, but it's there. I mean, it's probably been there, according to Bud Crisafulli, from the early 60s. So there is a water line there, and there is right-of-way that's been maintained by the county. That's also in your packet, but I'm going to give you another map so you can see that. Again, this isn't normally a zoning issue, but because the residents were so concerned about sewer coming down that road, I just wanted you to be clear that there is a county road maintenance map. According to Mr. Dunninghoff, this road has been maintained for much longer than 7 years, for as long as he could recall. And pretty much along most of East Crisafulli Road, there is maintenance lines of a substantial distance, showing that there is room in most locations to put a water line, a sewer line to the north. And I think I've misstated that. There is a water line from Cocoa Utilities on the south side, and the intent, if feasible, would be put the water line on the north side of the road, because there is county-maintained maps along there. There may be some directional boring. The developer is aware of that. He may have to repair some of the roadway. If he does directional boring or install the sewer, he's prepared to do that. But again, the cost of the sewer would probably be cheaper than $1.5 million to put in 110 septic tanks. High-end septic systems, not septic tanks. There are photos of flooding on the property that Mary Watkins has submitted. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I'm not sure what it's supposed to show. I don't know what it is. But whatever the code requires, whatever the comp plan requires, he's going to meet that. He's not going to cause damage to other residents. And if he's got flooding, he will take care of that on his own property. There's also pictures of properties nearby, but that's not this developer's concern. In summary, this development is consistent with broad acres, it's consistent with the trends in North Merritt Island, is compatible with the land uses in the area, which is the subdivision. The sewer is to be paid by the developer, and that there's no evidence that this rezoning or project is inconsistent with your administrative policies or section 62-1151C. With that, my client is here and the engineer is here if you have questions, and I would just ask for a couple minutes of rebuttal to the residents' comments.
Commissioner Lober, you have a question? For the applicant?
Several questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And Ms. Rosenka, thank you for being here. I'll direct my questions to you, and if you want to farm them out or respond to them yourself, whatever you find most convenient is fine by me. What has the developer done to evaluate historic drainage patterns?
That would be an engineering question.
And it's Mr. Kearns, correct?
Yes.
Good to see you, sir.
We're current 5963 Stillwater Avenue, Cocoa, Florida. We have the current FEMA maps in this area, and historically the east half of the property is not in the floodplain. The west half of it is partly in the floodplain. So we've got the most current maps on that.
Another question for you. I didn't see any mention of stormwater improvement mentioned in the application. What is the specific proposal with respect to stormwater improvement?
We're still in the rezoning stage. There is no, we've not done any surveying yet. We've not done any soil borings yet or in groundwater testing. So we do not have any design work done on that at this time.
I've got some questions for staff, if that's all right.
Sure.
Mr. Denninghoff, I understand you're a professional engineer. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Could you tell me just briefly a little bit about your training and experience that might be relevant to the agenda item at hand here?
I've been a practicing engineer for about 37 years, and the last 22 of which plus have been working for Brevard County in the capacity of producing plans and specifications for projects of a variety of sorts, including the review of proposed developments by private developers, as well as other cities and even the state.
Sir, are you familiar with this agenda item? Have you had a chance to review it thoroughly?
I've reviewed it pretty thoroughly, and I am therefore familiar with it, yes.
Is the county, from your position, aware of historic flooding in this area?
Yes.
Based upon your understanding of the materials that you reviewed, is the developer obligated to improve the drainage system in the area?
No.
In your opinion, based upon your training experience, could the proposed use cause or substantially aggravate any substantial drainage problem on the surrounding properties?
Yes.
Again, based upon your training and experience, could the proposed use cause significant and adverse impact on significant natural wetlands or water bodies?
Yes.
And again, in your opinion, based upon that training and experience and your familiarity with the documents that you've reviewed in connection with this agenda item, do we have the necessary information to determine the impact this development will have on drainage in the area?
No.
At what point in the permitting process, if you know, does the county approve the developer's stormwater retention design?
Ordinarily, that is done during the plans development phase, which is after the zoning phase. That's when it normally takes place, although not always.
If you know, what have other developments done in their design of stormwater retention to at least partially address historic drainage concerns?
They've provided elevated drainage design efforts associated with their development. By that I mean larger retention ponds than were otherwise required, and they've also provided compensatory storage for floodplain impacts.
Do you know whether we have the ability to ask the developer to provide that sort of info at this point in the process so that we have the opportunity to address these types of concerns?
We can. They can also offer to provide BDP or binding development plan conditions, which would assure that they provide an effort to address those concerns. Or they could actually go ahead and perform all of the design effort that's necessary to demonstrate precisely what it is that they're up to.
Beyond that, what, if anything else, will we need to get from the developer with respect to these items?
As I mentioned, the design effort and the plans, the drainage calculations, and the topography of the property that would illustrate what their impacts of their proposed development would be on the property and then on the floodplain as a result of what their the specifics of what it is that they're proposing. They could do it in the form of a binding development plan and limit themselves in some way.
Thank you, sir. And Madam Chair, I guess at this point, maybe we should take public comments, and depending on that, I may or may not have further follow-ups.
Sure, absolutely.
How many minutes should we allocate?
I mean, just a few minutes? Do you need a few minutes, or?
I need him to further explain every single question. 'Cause
Exactly,
his
and I was
answers-
going to save my questions for him till after, because,
His answers are conclusory, but I can wait.
no, come on up.
okay.
I mean, I think it wasn't, I didn't know that Commissioner Lober was going to ask Mr. Denninghoff, and I didn't know the line of questioning was going to go that route. Otherwise, I probably would have suggested we wait until it came back to commission to do that. So, I mean, that's not a problem, right, Aiden?
But she does have the right to cross-examine.
Yes.
on
Oh,
this
no, that's
point.
why I said it. I don't know, what about time limit? I mean, there's...
Yes, she has the 15 minutes, and she takes the cross-examination from the 15 minutes.
And we
Okay.
had just over a minute and a half, so just to round this a little bit better, maybe we round it up to 2 for her. Is that acceptable?
But
Is that a responsible way to handle it, considering she didn't know she would have to cross-examine?
It's up to
witness-
the board. You can certainly extend the time if you wish. If she requests it, you can do
obviously, you're
that.
not going to take 20 minutes to do it, so...
no, but
take the
Mr.
time you
Denninghoff
need.
is always very thorough in his explanations, so every
Take-
question I ask, he may take a long time to respond, and I can't gauge what that would do.
That's fine. Just go ahead.
Mr. Denninghoff, you said you are familiar with historic flooding in this area. What area are you referencing?
I'm familiar with the flooding history of this area, and I'm also familiar with the FEMA flood map with respect to this general area, but also with this particular piece of property.
By general area, do you mean all of North Merritt Island, or do you mean something else?
No, I mean within a reasonable distance of this particular site, but also in general North Merritt Island.
Okay, what is a reasonable distance in your mind? A mile, 2 miles?
I would say it bounded by Courtney on the north and Courtney on the west and Hall Road on the south and the NASA property on the east.
Okay, what was your northern boundary?
Courtney.
Courtney is south, right?
No, Courtney is both west
okay.
of and north
Okay,
of
you're
the
right,
property.
okay. Say Route 3, all right. And you said that you believe that this could cause or aggravate drainage problems, this project. How?
I said, I don't believe I said it would cause it. I said, I think the question was something along the lines of, did we have the information to, could it cause a problem? And then the other question was, did we have information to know if it would or not? And my answer to could it cause a problem is yes. And my answer to do we have the information to know if it does or doesn't, my answer was no.
Could it also improve drainage in the area?
It could, depending on the development pattern.
You also said it could cause problems with wetlands. How could this development as proposed cause problems with wetlands?
Well, it could generate a need for either wetlands impacts or cause other impacts to wetlands associated with the property. Again, we don't have the development plans in hand, so I simply don't know that it does or it doesn't.
And the developer would have to comply with all the wetlands codes and comprehensive plan requirements, correct?
It would.
You were asked if you had the necessary information to know if this project would impact drainage, and you did say no. Is that required by ordinance or comp plan at this stage of the zoning process?
It is sometimes provided. I don't think there is a code that requires it right now.
You said other developers have provided design efforts. What other developers and projects are those?
There were a couple of projects on Hall Road that were that provided additional information in the zoning process prior to the normal or the more standard approach of providing it during the design effort stage. I think there have been a couple of others that have done that as well.
Wasn't one of the projects on Hall Road a PDP that had to provide the drainage?
I don't recall.
For the record, that was Mission Estates, and they had to require the drainage for the PDP pursuant to your ordinances. You opined that the board could ask a developer or applicant to provide plans and drainage studies at this point of the rezoning stage. Under what code section can you do that?
I didn't specify that. I simply said they could ask for it.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you. Did Mr. Kern have anything further? Oh, you guys, you want to hold till after? Is that okay? You have
I'd rather
additional
address
questions
one, if I may, at this point.
with Ms. Rosenka?
Yes.
Okay. Do you mind?
Actually, I'm going to do this differently. If you'll have a seat, I apologize.
Okay, sure.
But if I may, this is a question for Ms. Bentley. With respect to the item that Ms. Rosenka brought up, in your opinion, can we ask the developer to provide those items at this point in the process?
What you have is an Administrative Policy 7, that is something you're supposed to consider when you're looking at rezoning items. It's in the front of your packets in every item. And it says, proposed uses shall not cause or substantially aggravate any A, substantial drainage problem on surrounding properties, or B, significant adverse and unmitigable impact on significant natural wetlands, water bodies, or habitat for listed species. So the question is, do you have the information to address that administrative policy, which you're required to consider? So you don't have a specific code section that says you must provide this kind of plan or this kind of engineering, but you do have a requirement in the comp plan to look at this issue. So you're kind of in a slightly gray area where you need some additional information.
So would you say then that it's permissive for us to get this information at this point in time?
It's permissible to ask for it. If they choose not to provide it, that's up to them, I would say. It's their application.
And just as a brief follow-up with respect to administrative policy, are there any other administrative policies of which you're aware that pertain to the questions that I've asked Mr. Denningoff?
This is the primary policy.
And lastly, Mr. Denningoff, is there anything you'd like to add context to that you were asked, or do you feel that we've covered it pretty well?
I think we've covered it. There was a comment that was made by Ms. Rosenka regarding compensatory storage that she made near the beginning of her presentation. I'm unfamiliar with some of the things that she was referring to there, or I maybe misheard it. I would kind of be curious to hear what she was referring to. It was about compensatory storage and floodplain. I'm very curious about
And if I could bounce that question to Ms. Rosenka.
My understanding that this property is not in the estuarian floodplain that would require compensatory storage. So, and I'm just repeating what Mr. Mayor told me, so I apologize if I'm not using the right words. But again, if it's required, the developer must do it. So they would do whatever's required by code.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenka.
Okay, I thought I had heard her say something a little different than what she just related.
All right. So I have a couple of cards here. Mr. Robert Curry.
My name is Robert Curry, and I live on 1365 Bishop Road on North Merritt Island. I'd like to thank the county commissioners for this opportunity to address this committee. After reading the North Merritt Island Dependent Special District Board meetings from 10/11, I would like to add my comments. The developer representative has said this request is for zoning change only, as if there is no negative impact if approved. The density would adversely impact the already poor drainage conditions. The only justification for this zoning change as presented is profit. Where is the study and data? How can a zoning change to increase density be approved without data? If approved, the developer has the green light. Let's get the data and the facts first. Putting the cart before the horse is never a sound business judgment. The original zoning change was requested from AU to RR1. That request was denied. Now the developer requests a change from AU to SR, which is much higher density. Now, got it right? Just to show about the drainage situations, the previous speaker had said it wasn't really shown that this project would be a drainage problem. Well, that drainage canal that comes down from their property follows along East Crisafulli Road. This is the junction of East Crisafulli and Joseph Court after a tropical storm, not a hurricane. If you can see, there is no road, it's underwater. The drainage ditch behind to the north is completely overflowing the entire area. Now this is East Crisafulli Road, traveling to the west at the big S curve. Again, you can notice there's no road, it's a river, and it continues on around. If you do not have a very large vessel or vehicle, you're not going to get out or in. And here's beyond the S curve, looking towards Judson and the drainage canal up there. Again, there's no road, it's a river. At the time, I had a 1-ton Dodge truck, and I could just barely get through there. And it's not a low vehicle, it's very high. And lastly, this is my property. I'm located south of that development in the same slough, and this is after the storm. My property is 4.5 feet elevation. The general elevation of that property that I want to develop is estimated at 3. And I verified that by looking it up. If my property looks like this during a tropical storm, which we have about 2 feet of water, and that was in my house also, how can you say it has no impact on the surrounding neighbors or neighborhoods that are already established? And just to give you some following facts that you can either take or ignore, 1 acre foot, which would be 1 foot of rain for 1 acre, is 325,831 gallons. An acre foot for 111 acres is 36,169,461 gallons. Now, where do you think most of that runoff is going to go? It's going to go right in the canal, following Judson, and it's going to spread out, come down towards my property. As it drains across the road, there is no separation from their property to my property to stop the flooding. And we have been flooded now major flooding twice and one minor flooding. And this has been with only small developments being added to that area in North Merritt Island.
Okay, your time is up, sir.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? What, you said these were tropical storms. Do you have dates on these?
This was Tropical Storm Faye, and let's see, that was September, I think, of 2001, I believe. 2008.
And that's all these pictures?
That's all these pictures.
Okay.
And the drainage hasn't improved since those pictures were taken.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Anybody have any further questions?
After public comment.
Okay. Mary Watkins?
Thank you for allowing us to address this. My name is Mary Watkins. I have property at 1595 East Crisafulli Road. I was a county employee in planning and development. During all of the storms, I lived at that residence through 2015 or so. And all of my coworkers know that I waded in and out of my property to be able to come to work. I have lived in Brevard County all my life and on North Merritt Island, in fact, in the middle of Ron Domena's area, since 1984. Flooding has been a problem up there. But aside from flooding, because it appears that a lot of people are very concerned about it, and justifiably so, and I might add that the county has not cleaned or maintained the ditches on Broadacres or Crisafulli, despite a written email that said that they would by June of this last year. I am now working for Department of Health and septic tank inspections. I have a comment to make about running a sewer line out there. Florida Statute 381, and I believe it's 005, requires that sewer line run past any residence has to attach to the sewer line. I've been in this job for 3 weeks. I've been in the field 2 days out of each of those 3 weeks. And each week, we have addressed a sewage on the ground complaint on Merritt Island, which has resulted from a lift station not functioning. Just saw one today, whereas a burst pipe and a complaint actually came in 3 days ago. It was addressed that day, and it's still not fixed. I do not know that all of the North Merritt Island residents know that they will be required to hook up to sewer if it is run past their house, but I believe that it will put undue stress, financial stress, on a large number of these residents. And with what I've seen of the county history of maintaining their sewer on Merritt Island, I would seriously not want my place hooked up to it. Aside from that, I think the traffic problem is a serious problem, not just on Crisafulli Road, but entering and exiting from State Road 3. It is not a straight across. It is a dangerous intersection at all times of the day. I've lived out there now since 1998. And I have been lucky that I haven't had an accident, but my son has had an accident crossing State Road 3 from West Crisafulli to East Crisafulli. I've seen multiple accidents out there. I think that the board should have all of these questions and data addressed before they consider increasing the density above the RR1 that they originally requested. RR1 would cause a lot of problems. It would more than double the amount of houses that are on Broadacre subdivision. So to more than double that and force traffic with only one way in and out, as the pictures that Mr. Curry has showed, will cause severe problems, especially if you have a medical emergency. how is your county vehicles going to get out there and help somebody? Addressing the flood maps, I've seen a lot of them grown up there. If you stand on the north end of Broadacres and look south, you'll see the road decline. The natural flow of Sykes Creek starts at Pine Island and goes south. All of the housing developments, smaller housing developments built up on Chase Hammock and stuff like that, to meet current code, where their land elevation is now above the elevation of Chase Hammock, it's causing the flow to stop going south. And so where does it go? It goes into the older subdivisions. That's my comments. Anybody have any questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. As an individual whose job is dependent on inspecting septic tanks, might there be any conflict in your testimony as to the validity of this plan wanting to actually decrease the number of septic tanks that you may have to inspect?
Not at all. All I'm making is a comment that I've observed the county sewer system, 3 complaints in 3 weeks.
I have a question.
One quick follow-up. You did say your job was to currently inspect septic tanks. You mentioned that when you came up here, did you not?
That is what I've
Thank
been
you.
hired to do, yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said you worked for growth and planning or planning and development in the county.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask how long and what you did?
I was a permit tech for 3 years, ma'am, almost 4.
What
And
kind
then
of
human resources for just under a year.
permit tech?
Yes, ma'am.
And what kind of permitting?
Building permitting.
Building permitting?
I
And
am
for how
capable.
long?
For 3 years.
3 years. I was going through the minutes in the Merritt Island meeting, and I was just curious, and I guess I need to know for the record and for our own knowledge that you were threatening a class action lawsuit against the county if we were to approve this?
I did not threaten a class action lawsuit. I made the comment that I would certainly consider suing the county if my property flooded. It got within half an inch of getting in my house in the last set of storms after the hurricane.
Okay.
I believe that there was an individual on the board that responded that they had already discussed as a group filing a class action lawsuit.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't have anything to give it a question. Commissioner Lober?
Actually, for Ms. Bentley with relation to something that was brought up during public comment here. I just tried pulling. Thank you. I just tried pulling up 381.005, and I think that's it's certainly in the right chapter, but it's not the correct exact site. Is there anything that you're aware of in Chapter 381 or elsewhere in Florida statutes that would obligate homeowners that are able to connect to a sewer system to connect to that sewer system?
There are some rules along those lines. There are certain distances where they need to connect if there's a sewer line available.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm learning and I've had to read a lot of code and I can't quote the exact quote. I knew it's statute 381.
I have to look up the vast majority of them too, so there's no worry with it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioner Lober, I found that statute number, and it's 381.00655.
00655, okay, connection of existing on-site sewage treatment?
But don't ask me about it.
Okay, I won't.
I found it, but I can't speak to it.
Thank you.
The statute, if you'd like it.
If you don't mind.
I don't.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenka.
And I could be way off, and I would have to read the statute and possibly ask for a more legal opinion, but I believe that it's only required for new construction, if I remember correctly. The statute only called for new construction if there was existing. I don't believe that people who have an existing, I think they're sort of grandfathered in unless they have to repair the system. Like if the system fails and the sewer's available, but I'm not 100% positive.
Could we
I'd
bounce that?
have to take a look.
Yeah. I believe it's something along those lines. Otherwise, everybody, I think our phones would be ringing a lot more for people that were forced to hook up to a sewer system that had an existing workable septic system.
Our engineer, Mr. Kern's, can address that for you, when he does, or if you want it now.
Do you mind?
I've got a card for him, so he's welcome to come speak.
Rick Kern. The state law on this issue says connection if available. The state doesn't consider what we would be installing as a force main, and they don't consider that as being available. If it was a gravity system, that would be different. But a force main is not in that status.
Thank you.
If I could also address any of the other issues, like the drainage issues. Okay. As far as the drainage goes, yes, it is a very difficult site. We don't have all the information yet necessary to do a design. To go obtain that information and do all the topographic studies and all the drainage design and all that, it's a very, very lengthy process, extremely expensive process. We're probably talking over $100,000 to complete all that work in probably at least 6 months. I would think that the county has not required that level of effort on a zoning case in the past. Yes, this subdivision can be designed and it has to be designed so that it does not cause any adverse flooding impacts on any surrounding property. It's both the state law and the county law as well, and the county certainly has very competent staff as well as does the state to review the plans. So yes, if the project would have to be designed in that manner. As far as any negative impacts go on wetlands, the state and the county as well have a no net loss policy. In other words, a development cannot have create any loss of wetlands or wetland function. And so that there's a variety of ways of doing that, but that's the basic state law on that issue. That's all I have.
Commissioner Lober?
With respect to one of the items you mentioned, that it couldn't cause, and if I'm misstating, please correct me, that it couldn't cause any sort of adverse flooding on adjacent properties. I believe the first question that I posed to Ms. Ryzenka that was bounced to you was with respect to historical drainage patterns. And my understanding of the potential issues up there with respect to new development is even if the new development is able to accept all rainfall that occurs on the surface area of that property, if there has previously been, prior to that development, drainage from adjacent lands, I don't see anything in this plan that would account for what would happen with that water. And if that water is rejected or no longer accepted onto the land, I would consider that to be an aggravation of an existing issue with respect to drainage. So is it your position that the plan as it's submitted is somehow obligated to make the developer take into account that historical drainage pattern where perhaps adjacent properties are having water graded or directed toward the property that's sought to be developed?
What the design would work towards is to fill the areas where the houses are going. That's primarily on the east side of the property, and the east side of the property is not in the floodplain. We would and then lower the grades, especially where we're putting in our ponds at, to basically reduce the amount of fill, especially in the floodplain over there. So it's quite possible that we could have a net beneficial impact on the flood storage in that area.
Is it also quite possible that you could have a net detriment with respect to that? We're required not to have an adverse effect, and I would consider that an adverse effect. So we would design it in that manner. And just real quickly, Mr. Denningoff, is there anything that you've heard with respect to the last few questions I've asked the engineer that you either take issue with or disagree with from your training and experience?
The short answer is yes.
Could you give me the slightly longer answer?
I'll try to do that. I think what is being referred to is whether or not compensatory storage would be required for floodplain impacts. And the way the code reads and the county code reads, but is a little bit interesting about estuarine versus riverine floodplains and how that's applied for North Merritt Island and has been applied. The concern that I have and have had for some time is that the estuarine exemption is dependent upon being estuarine floodplains aren't required to provide floodplain compensation. So you could fill in it and not compensate for that floodwater storage. Riverine floodplains are different. You have to provide that storage or compensatory storage. Most of North Merritt Island is considered to be estuarine historically. However, as we've studied it and looked at it more closely, it behaves, really most of it behaves more like a riverine floodplain. And so that's what the code talks about. Then there's what actually happens with a development if you fill in an estuarine floodplain, or rather any kind of a floodplain. And the question then becomes, do you cause a negative impact? And if you are not compensating for floodplain storage water to be able to store someplace else after you filled part of that floodplain, you haven't done that, then that water's got to go someplace else. And the estuarine condition, it can easily flow out into a major water body such as the Indian River Lagoon. In a riverine floodplain, it has to flow through a network of water flow channels and ditches and creeks and things of that nature before it gets to a major water outfall like the Indian River Lagoon. And so if you fill them in and it's like that riverine condition, then you can easily have a negative impact. And my opinion is that North Merritt Island behaves much more like a riverine floodplain than it does in an estuarine floodplain. Although I have to reveal or mention that historically we have regulated it as an estuarine floodplain, and which I believe is probably not the best thing for us to be doing.
So in sum, and I don't mean to paraphrase for you, but to cut to it, is it your understanding that the plan and the items accompanying the plan as submitted don't have any way of guaranteeing to a reasonable degree of confidence that the adjoining properties, the adjacent properties won't suffer from increased flooding as a result of the proposed development?
That's correct. I would also mention that in the conceptual plans that we have received in the application, probably a third of the lots that are proposed in the concept plan are in the western portion of the property, which is where the floodplain is.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Mr. Kearns?
Mr. Kearns, I'm sorry.
Hey, you've got a lot of hurdles you've had to jump through with sewer and septic situations. I'm an accountant, so I listen enough to the terms we have going through here. Have you guys done a topo study yet where you have an idea of the stormwater and how it can be maintained? Have you done any of that type of engineering yet? I think that would greatly help in this project of finding out how you're going to be able to contain the stormwater.
No, we've not done a topo survey at this time.
Are y'all planning on doing one of those?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Because I think that would help this issue tremendously on trying to figure out how you're going to maintain your own stormwater. Part of the problem there is I think you have only a 0.5 elevation above sea level, so you're already kind of in a bowl area. I think it's beautiful property. I'd love to see this project happen, but I think that's a concern. And when I was talking to staff yesterday, they have a little bit of a concern too because they haven't seen enough information. So I don't know where we're going to be with this, but I think I'd find more comfort if you probably weren't to work with staff a little bit on these issues and you guys were able to come up with some ideas on how we might be able to address taking care of the stormwater issues.
We have obtained the county LIDAR maps, and they are a topographic type map, and they do indicate the east half of the property generally around elevation 4, and the west half around elevation 3 approximately. The FEMA floodplain map shows the floodplain on the west half of the property around elevation 3. And that basically matches what the county LIDAR maps are showing.
Okay, Miss, can I ask Miss Amy?
Sure.
Ma'am, when I talked to you yesterday, I asked you about elevation and you told me a number of 0.5. Where did we get those numbers from?
We produced a map focusing on the property and looking at certain portions of a high-level map. It appears that it's less than 2, but I'll have to give me a moment to pull that map up.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zanka, since we're sort of doing this a little differently than we normally do it, because typically we don't usually ask staff a whole lot of questions until we bring it back to the commission, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. Do you have any questions for Mr. Denninghoff? Any additional questions, since you're the applicant? Just trying to follow the same flow.
Sorry, I think I started a bad trend here.
No, that's okay. I don't have a problem
I'd rather
with
you do
change.
it this way than at the end where I have to come up after the public hearing has been
And talk
closed.
about 13 different things. I
Right,
think it's
no.
actually a good thing myself.
Yeah, my hope was it would obviate some of the concerns that might be expressed by others so that we could move it faster.
Well, and I
but-
think, and I honestly, and this may be like a little, allow me to interject just a little bit. I think, and this is a discussion I've had with our attorney, and it's a discussion I think I've had with the manager, is I think we get away often from these types of discussions on technical issues as opposed to what people don't want. And I think, people need to understand a quasi-judicial hearing is about evidence. It's not about opinion. It's not about I don't want, and this could happen. It's about evidence. And I think that is something we need to really stay focused on. Because everybody that addresses the commission is there to provide evidence. So I just wanted to state that for the record.
Thank you. Mr. Denninghoff, is there any requirement that the applicant at the zoning stage provide sufficient information to determine whether compensatory storage is required?
I don't know that there's a requirement for it. I think there's a provision in the comp plan that allows for it to be considered.
And what provision would that be of the comp plan?
I would ask Ms. Bentley to provide that information.
Administrative Policy 7.
Okay, I'll address that later. And also, is there any requirement that a topo survey be provided at zoning stage?
That would be the same answer.
Okay, but there's nothing in the code section that says you must provide these things for rezoning?
Not for that particular item, yeah, that's correct.
And do you agree with Mr. Kearns that these studies that appear to be being requested at this rezoning stage will cost over $100,000 for this 110 acres of property?
It would be pretty costly. I wouldn't put a number on it, but I know that it's not going to be $5.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Carolyn Alvard.
I did. I wish I could print it.
Hi, Carolyn. Can you state your name and address, please?
Yes, Carolyn Alvord, 1355 Bishop Road, North Mare Island.
Thank you.
Hey, in the WK&R request, you'll see a density comparison chart. The lawyer for WK&R Groves Incorporated of Boynton Beach, Florida, and Chad Genomi, contractor for Beachland Managers, LLC, Kim Zanka of Cottonwood, Goldman, and many other developers in Brevard County, will argue that because developments denser than one house per acre have been allowed on North Mare Island, that this one and more should also be allowed. This argument is rejected by the Florida Supreme Court. They stated, and it has been upheld, that just because someone else got a zoning, that doesn't mean that the next person asking for it should get it too. It depends on the circumstances. They say that if applicants were allowed to change zonings because others had changed theirs, it would only be a matter of time before alterations of the whole zoning scheme by successively liberalizing the use of abutting property would result in disintegration and disappearance of the whole plan of zoning. So just because there are other developments on North Mare Island with this zoning, even if they abutted the property in question, that is no legal reason to approve more density on this scrub jay habitat property in this swampy, flood-prone area with very congested transportation, ingress and egress. Please deny this request as it stands. Thank you.
Commissioner Lober, do you have questions for her?
Just briefly, what's the citation for that case? It should say something like 123 SO.2D.
Oh, I see something here. 147 Florida, 480, comma, 3 SO dot 2D 364.
Thank you.
And I have one other comment. I figured it out. My neighbor just down the road from me just built a house. And just for their foundation itself, it was 160 loads of dirt just to raise the property. Okay, so I figured out with the 110 homes going in, and that would be 17,600 trips of fill to be brought in. That doesn't count the roads. And the other thing is they're counting on putting in lakes to retain the water there. The water table out there is usually between 6 and 10 inches down. So I don't care how much they dig, the water table is going to come up to where it's going to be anyways. Thank you.
I have Chris Minerva, and then Nancy Minerva right after.
Thank you.
Hi. Name and address, please.
Chris Minerva, 5385 Lovett Drive, Merritt Island, Florida, 32953. Thank you again for hearing me and allowing us to speak on this or any of the issues. Appreciate it. I simply put, I could go through a whole list of things, but simply put, I just wanted to say that I'm requesting that there be a moratorium on zoning until the small area study is either approved or denied. In approximately a year, with the inclusion of the 163 homes for the Demena rezoning, we're up to 767 homes on top of the already existing properties. And this includes not only the flooding, but the traffic alone. I mean, are we talking about schools being put up in that area? Or is there continued busing? My children were bused when they were in school to Central Merritt Island. With this property would be 877 homes approximately this year. I just don't know where the traffic is going to go beyond the flooding. And the flooding issue is really a big question. I think that everyone, because I've been listening to this and I understand, and I don't really want to waste your time. This is my opinion. I do work with the North Merritt Island homeowners, but I'm speaking for myself here, and I just don't know what to say. I appreciate your hearing me again, like I said, and I would just think if you were living in this area, I would really appreciate thinking about that. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Lober?
Anything else?
No, it's okay if you sit down. Question for Ms. Bentley. If the board were inclined, is there any lawful basis whatsoever to enact a moratorium pending the outcome of the small area study?
We'd need to work with zoning and look at the basis for a moratorium. You've got to have technical data for that. It may be there, it may not be there. I would have to work with them to come up with an analysis.
But
Bring it back to the board.
In your estimation, would that be an inordinately difficult task?
We really have to do the analysis first.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you, and I guess this would be to our county manager. We had the return of the small area study, which the recommendation was, and this may be, for Commissioner Lober's benefit, the suggestion dropping from from 1 acre to 2.5 acres, and that came before the board, and there was a vote. Am I fair to say that the vote to that was 1-4 rejecting that proposal that came up just 2 weeks ago? Or, I guess.
I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't recall.
I was under the impression that the board directed staff to pursue several recommendations together, and don't quote me on the numbers, I think they're 3, 7, and 8, and that was to pursue the FEMA floodplain model, then pursue a special area of stormwater concern, and then potentially pursue the future land use change. So that we were directed to continue evaluating all of those things. We're not on that path for that third task because we're still on task one. That was the impression I received.
Thank you. My recollection was that I believe I made a motion, and probably right, there was no vote. There was no second on that one, which is common. So, Commissioner Lober, assuming the votes hold here, and you were to second that, there is not the support on the board to change that from the 1 acre to the 2.5 acres.
I appreciate the heads up.
I'll just interject. I vaguely remember, we had so much going on with that report, but I believe that those items were removed at the suggestion, just for the record. Nancy?
Hello, everybody. My name is Nancy Minerva. I live at 5385 Lovett Drive, Merritt Island, and I am a citizen of North Merritt Island and an active member of the North Merritt Island Homeowners Association. I wanted to say sort of what was just said is in our, I think that you've all gotten a copy of the North Merritt Island Homeowners Association newsletter that was published in December. We sent it out. If you haven't gotten it, I'd be happy to supply it. But we summarized the small area study points that were just reviewed and said number 7 notes was here, improve the one of the recommendations were to improve the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency stormwater model for North Merritt Island. This stormwater model could be used to demonstrate whether proposed development would pose any adverse flooding impact on neighbors or streets. Cost to collect the survey and mapping data, $150,000. The cost to update the FEMA stormwater model, $300,000, totaling $450,000. Funding was approved at the meeting 11/13/18. Also create a special area of stormwater concerns within the boundary of North Merritt Island small area study to require development to meet specific stormwater standards. You guys approved that also. Require existing septic drain fields meet state standards is ongoing. Require new septic systems to reduce nitrogen by 65% would require new ordinance. Continue to seek hazard mitigation grant funds to purchase flood-prone properties in North Merritt Island and use drainage model to prioritize affected properties for potential acquisition, which was approved. The county should continue to see opportunities for enhancement to stormwater storage and treatment in North Merritt Island, including acquisition of sites and partnerships with other agencies. And there's a list of projects in work: West Crisafulli Road, Church Road drainage, Hall Road, Pine Island emergency outfall, and West Hall Road pipe capacity improvements. So that was all about utilities and natural resources that happened at the last meeting here. And the point that I wanted to make was sort of piggybacking on what my husband said, is that there are that great number of homes that have been approved that have not yet been built. And if they haven't been built, then we don't know what the results of the already approved houses would be. And so, excuse me, and then Commissioner Isnardi, you just said that evidence is required you would like us to provide evidence of what is important. So if the current water issues in North Merritt Island are not being handled, that people are being flooded and flooded out of their homes whenever we have a rain event, the future water issues have not yet been understood. So how can we approve additional housing when we don't have any evidence to know what the impact of what's been already improved has been? So thank you very much for considering those points.
Thank you. No more cards. Ms. Rosenka, did you have anything to add before I close the public hearing?
Thank you for letting me speak again. I do want to clarify one thing. Mr. Giannone is a contract purchaser under contract. That's why, even though I'm supposed to be in Tallahassee today, I'm here, and we didn't postpone it. So to request that an applicant spend over $100,000 for studies for a rezoning application is unreasonable. There's no requirements for any of these studies that have been requested. But there are substantial county codes, comprehensive plan policies, and state statutes that will require everything be met at site plan and construction plan stages. Mr. Denninghoff will be overseeing them, as will Ms. Sturck, as will everyone in the county. Mr. Kern says he can design it so it would not cause or substantially aggravate substantial drainage problems or on surrounding properties. This was very specific. Mr. Denninghoff said there's a historic flooding pattern in the area. His area is 6 to 8 square miles from best we can estimate from what he told us. Not on this particular property and the surrounding properties here. The administrative policy that was cited, Administrative Policy 7, is vague and ambiguous and possibly could be unconstitutional because it requires proving of a negative. And also, too, it requires many things. Shall not cause or substantially aggravate, so it could minor aggravate, any substantial drainage problems. We're not sure if there is substantial draining problems on the surrounding properties. The only person that spoke on surrounding properties could likely be Ms. Watkins. And again, she showed, the pictures that were shown were from Fay, and Fay was 2008, and Mr. Denninghoff has repeatedly said all of the improvements that have been made in North Merritt Island since Fay. Road improvements, pumps at Pine Island, additional drainage pumps and things like that. So that is not an adequate representation from 10 years ago. Ms. Bentley did say administrative policy is a gray area. Mr. Kern said he doesn't think you've required this of other applicants at the zoning stage. I would state that Mr. Denninghoff's testimony is correct. There is historic flooding in North Merritt Island, but it's speculative as this particular piece of property. Regarding some of the things that were said by several of the applicants, most of it's actually been covered as we've gone through. But regarding Ms. Carolyn Alvalier, and I'm not sure if I got her name correctly, she spoke before the Minervas spoke, and she said just because you do it on one property, you don't do it on others. Yes, if you one person jumps up a bridge, we don't all follow. But the reason that is important is because of your Administrative Policy 3. One of the criteria is that it won't that you are to look at is whether the proposed uses is consistent with an emerging or existing pattern of surrounding development, as determined through an analysis of land use patterns, actual development over the preceding 3 years, and development approved within the past 3 years. So that's what that chart goes to, is Administrative Policy 3. I agree with the Florida Supreme Court. Just because one person gets a zoning, the next person doesn't. But that's part of your administrative policies. Regarding Administrative Policy 4, that you can't materially adversely impact an established residential neighborhood. The only established residential neighborhood is Broad Acres. That's subdivision. That's why I mentioned that to you. Administrative Policy 5. So I got through it. Are adopted levels of service going to be compromised? No. Will the existing road system support this? As far as we know, yes, because of the State Road 3. Whether they exist, and because there's not significant traffic on East Crystal Foley Road. Administrative Policy 7 is dealing with the aggravation of substantial drainage problems we've discussed. The Administrative Policy 8, the character of the land use around it is residential, generally at 1 unit, some at 1 unit per acre, some at larger. There's a lot of vacant land out there as well. This is a piece of land that has an agricultural classification. They have cattle on it now. The land is changing. The land is not as usable for cattle grazing, and people aren't grazing cattle as much in this area. So there is a reason to change this so it can be used for development for homes. With that, I would state that there's no reason for you to require the studies at the rezoning stage. Those are all site plan issues, as have always been site plan issues. Some developers have gone over and beyond, but some have been required to because they're in the PDP stage, not in the rezoning stage. This developer has agreed to bring sewer. It will be a force main, so people do not have to hook up to it. They can if they want, but new development would probably want to hook up to it. So it is a benefit to North Merritt Island as well. There's no substantial competent evidence to say we haven't met the criteria of the zoning code and the administrative policies. And with that, I would ask you to approve this rezoning from AU to SR with the binding development plan, limiting it to 110 units to the acre.
Commissioner Lober?
Mr. Zenka, I'm just going to lay it out there. But for the concerns that I still consider to be unresolved with respect to potential for flooding in adjacent properties, I would happily support this. I will tell you, I think there's a lot of good with respect to this project. I think they're nice homes from everything I've been advised and everything I've seen included in this packet. I think it is good that they are proposed, or I guess I think it's good that they're running sewer down in connection with this, presuming it's approved. That certainly is something that I don't mind seeing made available as an option. I think 1 acre lots are in all likelihood sufficient, despite some commentary to the contrary. I also don't think we're anywhere near the capacity of the road, but the one threshold issue for me that's causing me consternation with respect to this issue is the flooding. If that were addressed, I would happily support this any day of the week, including in days ending in Y. Now, that said, would your client be opposed to tabling this with the understanding that in all likelihood it's going to pass if this one issue is addressed, or is it something that you'd prefer to have the board vote on tonight?
I think he's under a contract, so you'd have to ask him. But again, there's no evidence that there's flooding on surrounding properties. That's the standard, and the surrounding properties are vacant for the most part. There's no evidence before you.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm in a position where I have to rely on the expertise of my staff, and my understanding doesn't necessarily mesh with that. So again, I think it may come down to what your client's willing to do.
Good evening, Commissioners. Chad Giannoni with Beachland Managers. And as much as I'd like to, we're just under a time constraint right now to be able to do that. But I would say that, the zoning request tonight does not give us the green light to develop. I mean, really, it essentially gives us the ability to move forward with a lot of studies and a lot of engineering. I mean, that's when the process really starts. And it's going to take us 2 years. We could spend several $100,000. And we're not going to develop a subdivision that creates problems. It's not good for us. The lots wouldn't be marketable. I mean, we would have a lot to lose. So that's why we go through that huge expense. But right now, I mean, we could do that. We could, effectively even find out that there were no issues, and it wouldn't necessarily get approved. I mean, it's just...
If I may, I understand where you're coming from. Again, I've not heard any other concern from the other commissioners other than this one particular issue. So I hear that you're saying there's no guarantee that it would be approved. I can only speak for myself and tell you that barring nothing else extenuating occurring, I would be in favor of approving it with that one issue clarified so that it's no longer a concern. With respect to one of the other items that you mentioned about being able to market the lots in the subdivision as proposed, I don't have any doubt that the plans will accommodate the rainfall that occurs on that particular land, but my concern is solely with respect to historic drainage patterns, which wouldn't in any way necessarily impact your ability to market those lots, but it could well impact those adjacent lots. So again, I would just urge you to consider if there's any flexibility you have whatsoever with respect to the time, as I'd very much like to approve this, but I don't know that I'm in a position tonight to do that.
And yeah, we're not. We submitted this application almost a year ago, and we've had to extend it numerous times. We'd like to be able to accommodate that, but we just couldn't at this point. Like I said, we would, if it were approved tonight, we would just be able to engineer this project. I mean, we certainly would not want to bring a project down a flooded road if that were the case. If it was Crisafulli Road and we would like to know for sure that road is not going to be flooded and we're not impacting that adversely.
Let me ask a question to Ms. Bentley here. Ms. Bentley, is there any way that we could approve it contingent upon these concerns being addressed, or are we basically all or nothing?
You would not be able to do it contingent on submission of additional evidence at another time. The board needs to make the decision, and then the staff has to implement.
Thank you.
Might I suggest we add some language to the BDP saying that, we'll make every effort to, do these studies and make sure that we're not adversely impacting
Ms. Bentley, do you think that's sufficient, or would you propose different language? I'm just trying to work with them here to see what we can do.
Yeah, I think I'd need some help from the engineers on how to word it. I mean, so that there's no adverse impact. I don't know how we would measure that.
Mr. Denninghoff?
I think the language would be to provide compensatory storage for all floodplain below the 100-year floodplain.
Would you be amenable to that, sir?
You guys want to take 5 minutes and talk about it? We could take a 5-minute break. Right. Pardon me? Well, I asked these guys only because they're the applicants. I just. Okay, 5-minute break.
I wouldn't mind throwing out a quick question before they do, because I might have another question.
Okay,
Throw in it,
a
too.
couple of questions. I have some lights before we take a break. I have Commissioner Tabaya, and then.
Okay, and this was predicated prior to the offer, I guess, that maybe was just tendered. Commissioner Lober said he wanted to rely on the expertise of staff. My question is if we went forward with this, would the expertise of staff look over this to make sure that there was no adverse effect on flooding prior to the permit being issued?
The current state of the art, so to speak, for North Merritt Island would be dependent upon relying on the calculations of a compensatory storage calculation for floodplain impacts. Eventually, when we do the drainage study that we're working on, we could plug it into that model, and it would tell us in a more precise way exactly that whether there was an adverse impact or not. And it would identify how much of an adverse impact. The compensatory storage calculation makes the assumption that if and it's often called the cup for cup replacement of the floodplain, that would, together with engineering review of the design to make sure that there is no blocked drainage or anything of that sort, those two coupled together is a pretty high standard that allows for a good degree of confidence that you would not have an adverse impact.
Thank you. Is that what would happen? Should we, without this offer, is that what would happen normally, or would that be something different than the status quo?
I would expect that in this particular case, the applicant would assert that it is an estuarine, it is a estuarine floodplain and not required to provide compensatory storage. Although, in my opinion, it's really a riverine floodplain and does require compensatory storage to compensate for the impacts to the floodplain.
But is follow-up? But
Sure.
is that being an administrative decision? Your office or the county would be the ultimate one making that determination, not the applicant. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would do a calculation to determine that, and then we would review it for sufficiency. And if we agreed with it, it would be approved. If we didn't agree with it, there would be a dispute.
So my question comes back to this: whether or not we put these conditions right now on this. All this would be was a dispute resolution, I guess, to put it out ahead of time. Is that I guess where Commissioner Lober is potentially going?
It would. Ordinarily,
in your opinion, I'm sorry.
Ordinarily, we can resolve these things on a technical level. If the engineer of record provides the appropriate calculations that demonstrate the compliance, then we will approve it, and there's not a real big problem. We have had issues along those lines in the past, but ordinarily they get resolved.
And one final question: this estuary plain, or is there a quantitative measure to decide whether or not, or is it just two interpretations? I'm not familiar with either one. If Ms. Rosanka's client says one thing or the engineer says one thing and you say something else, is there a way to independently measure that, or is that just a judgment call in your opinion?
I believe it was a judgment call that was made about 10 years ago without my consultation, quite frankly.
I'm sorry. Judgment call by whom? Sorry.
My recollection is that former director of the Natural Resources Office made that determination.
Okay, so the county made that determination that it was or was not. I apologize.
That it was estuarine for North Merritt Island as opposed to riverine. The reason for that was that most of Merritt Island's floodplain areas are estuarine. North Merritt Island is different, and so it behaves a little bit differently. And that was also done before the current FEMA flood map were produced by FEMA. And so our knowledge and awareness of the issues associated with North Merritt Island have changed quite a bit since then.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Yeah, I like Mr. Lober's suggestion because that's going to give me a little more comfort when they go back and work with staff and we have those items worked out. I've got one more question on this because we have been working on this for a while. And the original plan was to go from 34 lots to 50, and now we're increasing density with sewer. So here's my question, because I know we're trying to do some roads up in the north end, and trying to get right away from private property has just been a headache. So what happens if they're going to do best intentions to put in this sewer line, and then they can't get anybody to give them the right of way? Do we have something protecting us here? Because I don't want to increase the density 36 to 110 and then come back, not that y'all would do this, and say we just can't get it in, but then they've gone ahead and we've moved the density up to 1 to 1 acre, which anything but a sewer line in this area wouldn't fit. Do we have something protecting us in this binding development plan, or do we, well, I don't know, sometimes they just come change it because like we've done everything, but we just can't get it in. I know we've changed some things before in BDPs. So would it be a safety even to put in here that if the sewer goes in, then we will change the, it to, took my glasses off, change it to the SR, but if not, it would stay to AU so that that density wouldn't be messed with if it stays with sewer. And I probably should have asked you this offline, but I just started thinking about it right now, so y'all enjoy my thought process. But
I think the way you would accomplish that goal would be to say that if sewer is installed, they can have 110 units, but if there is no sewer line installed and it's septic, it would be the lower number.
that would be wonderful, because I didn't see that in the BDP, so I think that might
Right,
be.
that is not in there.
Okay, great.
But I think that either way that you do that, you would have the SR zoning.
Correct.
And then the number of units permissible would be the only thing that would change.
Okay.
Commissioner Smith? Do you want to talk now or later?
I'm good. Well, first of all, I want to make note of the fact that I've met with Mr. Giannone several times over the last year. I disclosed that before, but I just want to make sure it's still on the record, or it is on the record again. I've heard a lot of this back and forth, and I've been here for 4 years listening to arguments like this. And one thing I've learned from staff is that it doesn't go forward if he doesn't get to the next step and the next step. And so I really believe that these issues will all be addressed before he can turn his first teaspoon of dirt. Is that not correct? Mr. Denninghoff?
With regard to the floodplain compensation, I believe they would assert that it has historically been treated as an estuarine floodplain, and they do not have to provide compensatory storage. If we did not treat it that way, I believe they would strenuously object to that, and that is the only way right now that I could confidently suggest to the board that we could assure that there'd be no negative impacts on adjacent properties in that area by way of increased flood elevations.
Well, in keeping with that, looking at those pictures that we saw, if we had a storm, and you guys don't want me to repeat what my definition of is again, but if you had another 24-inch storm rain event in 3 days, I'm not sure anything you do would change the flooding pattern of North Merritt Island. I don't think this guy could be blamed for somebody else's yard being flooded if such an event occurred. I mean, anybody can point fingers, but you know what I'm saying?
I understand.
It's pretty hard to point fingers at people when Mother Nature does something that unusual.
I understand your comment, Commissioner, and appreciate it very much. I would only suggest that we don't have the technical information to demonstrate exactly what the effect would be. What I'm suggesting is that compensatory storage is the most secure way that I know of to try to assure that there's a neutral impact on the floodwaters in that area. If we had our study that we're doing, then I could perhaps provide additional or different information.
So the difference between compensatory storage and a normal storage is just dig a deeper hole?
No. A deeper hole on North Merritt Island just makes a deeper pond.
That's the answer I was looking for. So, okay. You can go ahead and explain yourself then.
All right. So compensatory storage is an area where you have provided floodwaters to be able to reside or collect, gather, without causing the rest of the floodwater to rise up above where it would have been had you not done your other activities. So as an example, in a bathtub that's full to the brim, your activity might be to fill part of the bathtub. As soon as you do that, water is going to overflow the bathtub. So what compensatory storage does, it says, okay, I'm going to allow you to fill part of the bathtub, but someplace else you got to make the bathtub enough bigger to where it won't overflow the bathtub anymore. And so you compensate for that lost storage within the floodplain. It is a different calculation, a separate calculation from the normal stormwater calculations, and it can be and normally is in addition to the normal stormwater calculations, but there are circumstances where you can sort of have a part of it serve dual purposes. The key is, in the case of the groundwater, once you dig down to where the groundwater is, that's no more storage than what you had before.
So you have to build it up.
So you have to find a place where high ground is, remove the dirt out of it, thus allowing the water to store in there. That's the classic way to provide for it. So,
well, in a case where, like, you have such high water levels in the ground,
mm-hmm.
Can you achieve what you're saying by building a berm around a storage area?
It's usually not that simple. You can find an area where there's a difference between where your ground is and your groundwater. You can dig that area out and then open it up for flow from the floodplain. And whether you have a berm around it or not, you've got to allow the water to flow in and out of it. And that volume that you create there needs to equal what you filled in someplace else, whether that be for a road or for a house or a clubhouse or a retention pond even.
Thank you. Okay, well, that's my questions and we have our answers. I've been listening for 4+ years to residents from North Merritt Island with their flooding problems. And I don't know if this specific area has those kinds of flooding problems, but I would vote tonight to allow them to go forward so that they can bring their solutions back to us, because it can't go forward without us looking at it again. So I think that we should give them the opportunity to do that. Mr. Giannoni's been very cooperative to this point and been willing to do what he needs to do. And so if we can get that information back from them before he makes the next step, we can make a judgment at that point in time whether we want to continue moving forward or if we want to tell him to stop and we want additional things done. So that's where I am.
Great, and I was going to wait till the lights stop, but we just keep resetting and they keep filling. So I'm just going to say a few things. I just want to be careful that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're requiring these guys to go estuarian floodplain versus, I mean, if this was a problem in this area 10 years ago and we mislabeled it and misclassified it, we've had 10 years to fix it and we haven't. So now we're going to burden the developer to say that we're going to require more of you versus somebody else that brought something forward because he doesn't have a site plan completed. And I think that we go into a bit of we put ourselves in a unique situation that, you know, depending on how big the developer is, and I know I used to see this when I used to sit in these zoning meetings at the city of Palm Bay, you don't have big developers in some of those areas, and they don't have a completed site plan because those things are to be addressed during the site review, and all of those studies are done during the review. So I would be cautious as a board to not put an unfair burden on any developer, big, small, or otherwise, and expect them, when this is just a zoning request, we should be strictly looking at the zoning. And that's just, I guess, my 2 cents. And I could bring up Ms. Rozenka and ask her some questions, but I think I can at least say this comfortably, is that this, no matter what happens in Merritt Island, and I don't think that I'm speaking out of sorts, nobody wants anything built, developed, done, or otherwise in Merritt Island. I think that's pretty clear, and you only have to have been watching county commissions meetings for the last, and I understand why. They have flooding problems. And we are addressing them, and I think this board has committed to addressing them. And I think developers, you know, we've had a recent development where they did take on more water and more flooding than what they were even required to because they wanted to be good neighbors. So I think, you know, as long as we're moving in the right direction with our small-scale study and as long as we're doing what we can, I mean, ultimately the developer is going to be responsible for what he does there, and ultimately we're responsible for reviewing that. So if we need to change the classification, I would suggest that we do that next, but that's probably a separate issue. But I'm sure I could have an engineer come up here and say the same thing. Well, no, they disagree. So maybe we need an independent body or an independent person to look at this and say, how do we classify this? Just because I don't think it's fair that we unfairly burden anybody, developer or otherwise. Because, and again, I'll just state this because, again, I want to give everybody else a chance to talk. The big issue, more so than the flooding, because it's always flooding in Merritt Island, you know, and rightfully so, everybody's concerned about flooding. The big issue was sewer. The big issue was septic. And the developer agreed to run sewer so people wouldn't have to have septic. And then it was, well, we don't want to hook up to septic. Well, I thought the big issue was the lagoon. And so I think we're kind of getting off from that. And now we're finding another, you know, we're back on the flooding because the sewer issue's been addressed. So I would support this going forward only because I know staff is going to do their due diligence. And I know the county would I don't want to say this lightly, but I know the county would rather be sued than allow a developer to do something that's going to cause additional flooding to any worse additional flooding to the neighbors or to the neighboring community. Commissioner Lober.
Okay, I'll just tell you flat out, if it's a realistic potential of us causing flooding to adjacent communities or getting sued, I'll take getting sued. That said, with respect to Commissioner Smith, I appreciate that you have more experience on this board than I do with 4 years under your belt. But were I to be here 8 years, 2 terms, I still don't know that would put me in a position of having the same expertise as someone that's been a professional engineer for decades on end. I don't necessarily disagree with most of what you stated, but my concern with moving forward this evening is that if there is a dispute as to the type of floodplain that this is classified as, that may put us in a position where the county has to expend much more in the way of resources addressing and resolving that. And we at this point have the ability to do something to ensure that the neighbors are treated appropriately and fairly. With respect to what Madam Chair said, I agree. There has been a concerted effort from North Merritt Island to oppose pretty much all variety of increase in population. And I know from what you stated, and I don't disagree, that before it was a septic issue. I'll tell you, everything I've ever said with respect to my position, with respect to this chair, is that I don't believe it's fair to prohibit folks from building land where they don't have the ability to hook up to sewer simply because we have a concern about septic. And especially in this location where we're nowhere near a waterway, certainly we're not within any 50 yards of one, that's never been my concern with respect to this. I do like that they have sewer that they're bringing in. I think that's great. I think it's going to provide other opportunities for nearby landowners, and perhaps the county can get with them, and instead of putting maybe a 4-inch main, I would presume they're inclined to put in perhaps a 4-inch line for 110 units. Maybe the county pays the difference and they put in a 6-inch line so we can connect more properties, and it's a win-win. It doesn't cost them anything and it doesn't cost us anything. But my concern just goes back to that one item. I would like to see this approved in some fashion, but I just think we need that one particular safeguard to ensure that the adjacent and the nearby properties don't suffer because we were overly hasty in pushing this through. I can't speak as to what my predecessor has found important. It appears to me from the face of this that the septic issue was the most important to him. It's not that I don't care about that, but I think that with the distance that this is from the nearest body of water, that would not have been my issue. And I would just prefer that folks not view my stance with this in light of what the prior commissioner who had this position felt was most important. Again, it's something where I have done everything thus far. Granted, it's been a total of one meeting to defer to commissioners with respect to their districts wherever reasonably possible. This is something that is in the heart of my district where I have a lot of constituents that have concerns that they've expressed to me. I respect, and my general view with respect to land rights is do whatever the heck you want to do with your land as long as you're not hurting your neighbors or impacting their property values. If someone wants additional restrictions, they can move into an HOA community, as I've done. But this is, to me, in that gray area where I don't know what the impact is going to be on the neighbors. And it may be absolutely correct that what you propose to do doesn't have any impact on them. But I just don't know that at this point. And if you're willing to assume the suggestion of Mr. Denningoff, I'll support this right now. And I can tell you, based on what you've heard, there are your 3 votes already. You'll probably get the other 2 as well. On the other hand, if it's something you're not willing to assume, I don't know that I'm in a position to support this at this point. And obviously, there are 2 other commissioners that haven't expressed overwhelming support for it at this point. So I don't know how it'll go if you don't assume that additional requirement.
Commissioner Tabaya?
Thanks. And I'll clear that up, because I guess a mediation, I guess, for the best term, has been offered there, which I appreciate, Commissioner Lober making that. But I've heard 2 affirmative, it sounds like, and, I feel like watching Peanuts. I don't know if you've ever seen that cartoon, but Lucy holds the football and Charlie Brown runs up to the football, and just as he gets close, she always yanks it away over and over and over again. And, Mr. Gioni's got to be tired of government here. First of all, we gave him a hard time about septic tanks, right? And here he comes back and is willing to spend $600,000 or $700,000 for sewer. And Commissioner Smith pointed it out, and so did the chair before me. But we pulled it away. It cost you $600,000 or $700,000. Ms. Rosanka is very effective. I'm sure she doesn't come cheap. So she has to come back, and as does your engineer. And now we give you a hard time for potentially having other people hook up to, which we may or may not. And now it comes to the flooding issue. And I'll tell you what, if you don't do this, if I were you, I wouldn't accept this deal, because you'll come back here again and we'll want your homes painted green. And then we won't like the green color they're painted, and we'll want them tile roofed and solar. So if you need 3 votes up here, I think I've heard 2. I'll be the 3rd. You're more than welcome to take the deal. But I would, take the 3 votes, because I certainly will be voting for this as presented. Again, I'm sorry for you having to go through this over and over and over again. I wish you all the best, and I will be strongly voting in favor of this.
Commissioner Pritchett?
The phrase "cause no harm" it's a pretty big phrase that we do things in our life, and we can't cause harm to people around us. So you hit a real strong phrase there, Commissioner Lober, when you said it. Would it be possible to have them agree in the BDP, if they would, to do a topo study as we got going? Because y'all said you were going to. Maybe that would help satisfy that. I don't know. You guys would have to give me some feedback. But if we know we had that coming in and we weren't going to cause any harm to the neighbors, again, I want you to do your project. My concern is that your property is lower and it drains poorer than the other properties around there. So I would have loved it if you guys would have already had a little bit of information. This is how we're managing our stormwater. It would help greatly because, we are greatly increasing the density. We're not taking away property rights here. We're helping to add to it. And it is a good project, but, every time you've brought it, we've had a little bit of a different swing to it. So I don't think anybody here is against your project. But I think we've got to have some plan, or you guys putting in there that you're willing to make sure that you're causing no harm with the stormwaters we're moving forward. Maybe that would be agreeing to a topo moving forward. And I really think in that BDP, I would love to have you put in there, if you don't get in the sewer line, it stays at 36 units on the septic also. But that's a thought to throw out, and I would love to hear other commissioners' ideas on that, and legal and everybody, but it's just something I was contemplating.
Commissioner Lober?
Well, seeing as how the votes are stacked, that would make me more comfortable than the alternative of just seeing it go forward with no assurances whatsoever.
Since we never officially closed the public hearing, I guess...
I'm not sure what you're asking with the topo. I don't know how that would be worded.
You're going to do it anyway.
They have to do it during the site, yeah.
Okay, Ms. Aaron, how does that work? So if it's in the BDP, is that going to satisfy all the questions we're having about keeping the water on the property?
I can ask about when we could enforce it. I don't know what it would assure us of.
Okay.
But I would stipulate when they would provide us with that. Is that, prior to a pre-application meeting? At what point? I'd prefer that the BDP clarify when we expect to receive that.
So that would be a key term right there. So what would be...
Prior to site plan submittal.
Okay.
And then as far as the units, I suppose we'd be willing to agree to, say, the 50 units if we do not get the septic. Is that a fair compromise?
I don't think we ever got to the 50 units yet, though. Oh, we did on the septic, didn't we? Did we?
On the septic, well, it was sort of up in the air. It was a small...
You tabled it on us and brought it back.
It was a small
Yeah.
amount up.
So you would do the 50 with the high-end septic tanks?
Yeah, in the event we didn't.
I think I'm good with that one.
I'd like to call a question.
Hey, the chair has one last thing to say. And I just want to say, and I respect Commissioner Lober's concerns, and also because he just got here, so he has a lot of information. We just have the history with this project. So it wasn't with the previous commissioner. It was sort of what we've heard as a previous commission. And this estuarine floodplain versus the river idea, this was not brought up before. And so although we're here hearing it as a new item tonight, the issue was the septic and the sewer, and that wasn't just Commissioner Barfield. That was all of us discussing it. So, I have confidence in our county staff to do due diligence, and I would just implore you to get with Natural Resources on it as another side issue, and maybe during commission business we could discuss it, to discuss if we need to reclassify this area. But I don't believe that the developer should have to be the one to do it. So Commissioner Smith called the question. So I guess we need a motion.
Madam Chair,
With the...
can I make the motion?
Sure. With the...
Yes, yeah. Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the request to change zoning classification prior to, from AU to SR with the BDP, with a topo study done prior to the site plan, and the addition of 50 units if sewer is not connected, I think is available.
You mean a total of 50 units?
A total of 50.
Okay. Don't want 160.
Was that pretty clear, Eden? Yes. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1 with Commissioner Lober voting against.
I do wish you all well with that. I think it's going to be a good project in the end. Do you mind? Or even 3 minutes?
Okay. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break.
Thanks. Thank you for letting me move for a moment there.
Oh, that's all right. It's been a couple hours. Okay, we're calling the meeting back to order. Commissioner Pritchett?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a request. I think I would like to table item 6. I don't think we're ready, so I would like to request a table for item 6, ma'am.
I have a motion by Commissioner Pritchett to table item H6.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Lober?
Just a quick question. Do we have anyone here that we know of that submitted to comment on this item?
I did.
Mr. Knox, I guess I would defer to Commissioner Pritchett. Did you want to give a reason for tabling, or did you?
I've just been with staff a little bit, and I think they just turned in a new BDP, and I think it's still got a lot of loose ends, and I think tonight to try to go through all the details, we're going to be doing it a few times, so.
We would support continuance to a time certain. That was the only thing I came up to say. We were looking forward to the February zoning meeting as the time that you'd hear.
Okay, yes, sir. Table
Thank you.
to February.
Thank you. Mr. Knox, I just wanted to apologize. I see you here. I know we had set a meeting to meet before. I ended up being in trial, wrapping up one of my last cases, so I did want to apologize.
No problem at all,
since you're
and welcome
here.
to the commission.
Thank you.
And I wanted to disclose to the board that I did meet with Mr. Knox and the applicant on 1031 and again on 1129, and I'll disclose that at the hearing. And, you know, I would be in favor of tabling this only because the BDP has changed so significantly. And normally, and I wouldn't have a problem listening to public comment, but I would just let the board know that if the BDP's changed, it's difficult to know what we're commenting on, and since we're not hearing the item, it would probably be prudent that we just take a vote on tabling the issue.
And it would be to time certain, February 7th?
Time certain, February 7th?
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? The applicant requested that his item be rerouted back through the Planning and Zoning Board. So
Correct.
if we were to do that to cover our public notice procedure, I think we need a date certain for that board and for the Board of County Commissioners. If we were to send that to the Planning and Zoning Board, which is on January 7th, I believe, those materials are due within the next few weeks to head out. So we have another option that would get us to the February 7th Board of County Commissioners meeting if on the January 28th LPA, they acted as the Planning and Zoning Board and heard the item. And that would give us some more time to prepare those materials.
That's fine.
Okay, motion to table to February and send it to the LPA on January the 28th.
I just want to make sure as well. I believe we already disclosed, but I know my office staff has met with Mr. Knox, and I believe I may have met with some of the adjacent property owners as well. But with that said, I'm happy to move on with the vote if that's okay.
Okay. Commissioner Smith?
I want to disclose also that I've talked to Mr. Knox and his folks several times, and I'm partially the culprit that's responsible for this because this is in my district, and I raised some issues to the Happy Landings folks, and so they're willing to work with me, and so that's requiring them to go back to the P&Z board.
Just a note on that too, since everybody's saying something. I also met with everybody, but I've given you guys full documentation, so.
Right. And we could talk about later how we handle that because, you know, typically I was always used to disclosing it during the public hearing, and I know some commissioners prefer to submit it in writing. So I guess it just depends, I guess, on your preference on how you choose to do it. But my disclosures will likely be verbally, and they'll be during the public hearing, so it's clear. Because that's the agenda's over 1,000 pages, and oftentimes those disclosures, not that anybody's trying to hide anything, but they can get lost in there, so I prefer to say it during the meeting
I like it.
as a personal preference. So if there's no more discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Ma'am, I have one more. I'd like to request a table item 5.
H5?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I can read that into the record if you'd like to make take an action. It's a proposal by James and Joanne Thomas, trustees, requesting a change of zoning classification from RR1 and BU1 to SR and removing a BDP, and they've requested to table to February 7th, 2019.
Got it. We have a motion by Commissioner Pritchett.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Smith. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, let's get back in order here.
So I think we're back with item 2?
Yes.
Okay. That one is a proposal by Linda L. Moros requesting a change of zoning classification from EU2 and SEU to AU on a property that's 3.35 acres in size, located on the west side of North Indian River Drive, approximately 0.4 miles north of Briarwood Lane. This is in District 1.
Is the applicant present? Could you just state your name and address for the record?
Alan and Linda Moros, exempt address.
Don't worry, they're not talking about you.
Okay.
I met with you, and this is up in our area, and it's wonderful. We haven't heard any complaints, and I'm fully supportive of it. So I make a motion to approve it.
Second.
I've also reviewed this item, and I think it's easy approval. Sorry you had to wait.
No problem.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I should have told you that early.
Item 3 is a proposal by C&K LLC, represented by Scott Wiederman and John Frazier, requesting a change of zoning classification from BU1 and IU to BU2 on a property that is 3.33 acres in size, located on the northeast corner of North Wickham Road and Welty Drive in District 4. I would like to clarify one change that occurred between the Planning and Zoning Board and this board. After review of the staff comments, we found some errors in the preliminary transportation concurrency analysis. That analysis was redone and re-provided to the applicant. We have added additional for board consideration language in the staff comments. That's also in the agenda report, and provided that information to the applicant. Unfortunately, the Planning and Zoning Board did not hear that information, so if you perceive that that is substantial enough that you wish to return it through that board for them to review that, to see if that may or may not have affected their recommendation, you certainly have the authority to do that. And I can answer any questions about those changes.
Madam Chair, I've reviewed this. I've met with Scott Wiederman and John Frazier, and I would like to make a motion to approve this request for zoning change from BU1 and IU to BU2.
I have a motion by Commissioner Smith, a second by Commissioner Pritchett. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Item 4 is a proposal by CLA Retail LLC, represented by Robert Casey, requesting a CUP for alcoholic beverages for beer and wine only for on-premises consumption in conjunction with a restaurant in a PUD zoning classification. This proposal is on a property that is 2,800 square feet. It's just the interior of the building, located at Lake Andrew and Citadel Way.
Commissioner Lober?
Just want to disclose that I ate there earlier this week, and it was rather delicious.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to approve this CUP for alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption. That's it.
I'll second.
Motion by Commissioner Smith, second by Commissioner Lober. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Good luck.
Item 7 is a proposal by Jessica R. and Stephen F. Paglialonga requesting a change of zoning classification from AU and EU to all EU on a property that's 1.33 acres in size on the north side of Gales Way, just west of North Tropical Trail in North Merritt Island in District 2.
Commissioner Lober?
Oh, if he'd like to comment
Okay.
first, perhaps that's the...
Come on up. Are you Stephen?
I am.
Okay. Name and address for the record, please.
Stephen Paglialonga, 470 Gales Way. So we'd like to change the zoning to build a detached guest house for my parents to stay throughout the year. So that's the plan.
I read through as well.
Okay.
Commissioner Lober?
I just want to say I met with staff and discussed this one. It looks like it's something that's reasonable given the neighborhood and how the adjacent properties are set up. It doesn't appear that it would do much in the way of increasing traffic. I know that's a potential concern that's been expressed. So I am going to be moving, unless we have other items in terms of public commentary. I'd move at this point to approve it.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Lober, second by Commissioner Smith. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Good luck.
Thank you.
Item number 9 is a proposal by Suntree and Wickham Station LLC requesting a CUP for alcoholic beverages also for beer and wine only for on-premises consumption in conjunction with a vapor store in BU1 zoning classification. This property is located on the southeast corner of North Wickham Road and Suntree Boulevard in District 4.
Do you have any cards?
I have 2 cards. Amber Kovach and Jeff Baker.
Yes, I'm Jeff Baker, the managing member of Suntree and Wickham Station. I just wanted to thank you for your consideration of this change, and the Amber is the tenant.
Oh, okay. Anybody have any questions for him?
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to accept this CUP change for alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption.
Motion by Commissioner Smith. Second. Second by Commissioner Pritchett. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Item 10 is a proposal by Anthony Lopes and Eugene Lamondo, represented by Scott Knox, requesting a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment from Res 2 and NC to all CC on a property that is 1.22 acres in size, located on the west side of US 1 down in the Miko area. I'll read the next item, item 11, into the record as well, so you can talk about both of them simultaneously. The item 11 is a proposal by the same folks on a property that's 1.96 acres in size. There's more of a zoning change than a comp plan change. Requesting a rezoning from BU1 and TR3 to all BU1.
I would just like to disclose before you speak that I've met with you on this issue on 11/29, and you just talked about the project and answered my questions.
I have also.
Ditto.
Okay, my name's Scott Knox. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Lopes and Mr. Lamondo, and my address is 1900 West New Haven in Melbourne. Before I get started, I do have 2 pieces of paper I'd like to share with the board.
I hope that's 2 each. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, the first piece of paper I handed out was a letter which we received today in favor of the application, so I thought we would give that to you. And the second one is a revision to the BDP that you have in your file, which was based on a staff recommendation or comments that came out today, or yesterday, I guess, that I received, and adjusted the language. So I'll be talking about that as I go along. I do have a small PowerPoint presentation because partially you'll have seen some of this before, but Commissioner Lober wasn't here, so I thought I'd go through a little bit just to give
Thank you,
some
sir.
background. Okay, this is a property which is 1.96 acres. It's owned by Mr. Lamando and Mr. Lopes. They've owned it for 38 years. They've been around to take care of that property for all that time. You'll see the property here. I think you can see that, yeah. And here's the problem we have. The problem we have is we have three separate land use classifications and three different zoning classifications on a 1.96 acre piece of property. So if you look at the very front of the property, you see it's zone BU1 with a CC commercial, community commercial land use designation. And the middle segment of the property has got a neighborhood commercial designation with TR3 mobile home zoning. And the very last triangular piece of property on the portion of the 1.96 acres is zoned residentially and has got a residential land use designation. So what my client is proposing to do is to try to consolidate the whole 1.96 acres into community commercial as the land use designation and BU1 as the zoning designation. And it's our belief that the prevailing comprehensive plan policy in your future land use element that deals with this particular project is going to be policy 2.15, which deals with strip commercial. And what it basically says is that strip commercial is allowed to infill, and that's, I think I'm going to show you how that happens with this particular project. Here is a layout of all the existing commercial zoning on the left-hand side and all the commercial land use designations on the right-hand side. And what you'll see is a strip pattern in both land use and zoning. So what your zoning ordinance allows you to do under policy 2.15 is to fill in any of that commercial that where it's appropriate. And they actually provide a demonstration of that in the form of a graphic, which I've now got in front of you on the screen. And you'll see the fill-ins occur when you are filling in between the boundaries of the property, as opposed to an extension where you're expanding the zoning classification to someplace else. And what we're attempting to do is try to fill in this little blue area that you see on the right-hand side with commercial, which is consistent with the commercial that is on the right-hand side of the property, on the east side of the property. You also notice this commercial, community commercial across the street, which is a marina, community commercial down here, which is another marina, and there's community commercial and existing commercial across the street on the south, which is a strip plaza. On the north, you have also neighborhood commercial, which is, again, commercial, and you can see the pattern there. Now, we had come before the board once before, and we were asked to go back and talk to the neighbors who were opposed to it at the time we came before the board and expressed their opposition. And one of the things that the board had asked us to do was prepare a concept plan, which is what we've done, because Mr. Lopes and Mr. Lamando are trying to build a hotel on this property. There is a marina across the street, as I mentioned, and one within a quarter of a mile down the road. And the marina folks, one of them is here tonight to talk to you a little bit, but they seem to have experienced some utility of their facilities from people who are from South Florida, people who are from Orlando, people that come over they happen to like the ambiance of the Mico area, and they use that marina, but they have no place to stay. They have to go down to Indian River County to stay at a flagged hotel, which would be a brand name hotel that you'd be familiar with. There's no brand or flag hotels in this area at all. This particular plan, if you look at it, and I've got a plan mounted over here so you can take a look at it, is designed to address some of the problems that the folks raised at the last Board of County Commissioners meeting. And we also had a meeting with the Homeowners Association on November 27th to discuss other issues they had. And they identified 9 different things that they were concerned about, 6 of which really relate to the plan itself. And we've addressed each one of those in this plan, and I'll explain that to you in more detail as we go along. But what you see here is the basic footprint of the hotel would be a 3-story hotel. So the first thing that we've agreed to do is limit the height to 35 feet. Now that doesn't seem to be too much of a concession because the height limit is 35 feet in this particular zoning classification, but you're also allowed to apply for variances to get height variances. We are basically giving up that right, and by doing that, we're basically saying if we want to go higher, we're going to have to come back to this commission to get that approval instead of going to the Board of Adjustment. The other thing we did is to make sure that the property is facing north, away from the folks who are concerned about the lighting, so that when people come in off the street and the traffic will follow the pattern that goes through the north parking area. There's very, very little parking on the south side of the building, so there won't be a lot of lights that are flashing in people's eyes or disturbing them. The property slopes from the west to the east quite considerably. It drops from 15 feet down to about 5 feet. So it's about a 10-foot drop over that period of time. So that's our engineer decided that since water does flow downhill, it's a lot easier to put the retention ponds at the front of the property, which is what they did. And as a way to protect the property owners next door, we also agreed to put a fence around the entire property, which was an 8-foot fence. When we went to the homeowners association meeting, they were concerned about a wall as opposed to a fence, and they wanted it to be 8 feet tall. We agreed to, as part of our binding development plan, which you have in front of you in your materials, to put an 8-foot fence in. Staff came back and said the wall would have to be put up because when you butt up to property that is residential, you're supposed to put up a wall. Well, so we put that as an option in there too. We don't necessarily agree that this is abutting residential property in all respects because it does abut commercial property on the south. It does abut the homeowners association recreation area and their clubhouse on the west, but it does, in fact, abut some residential property. However, we'll put the wall up as part of our agreement in the binding development plan. Go to the next slide. And what I just handed out to you was a revision to what we have in your materials as the conditions that we had discussed with the homeowners. I received emails from the vice president of the homeowners association and the president of the host association. The vice president noted that after we had this meeting, she sent me the email, or I got a copy of this email, saying that we had met all the requirements, virtually all the requirements. And the president of the association then sent me an email saying, would you please put a letter that I had sent to them. I put those conditions that we would agree to in a letter that I sent to the association. And she asked that I put those in the binding development plan, which is what I did. And that's the version that you see up on the screen right now. As of, I think it was yesterday, we got new comments. It may have been this morning, as a matter of fact. We got new comments from the staff relating to that new language that was put in there. And we have addressed that language almost verbatim in the yellow areas that you see on the piece of paper that I handed out to you. So we're trying to accommodate not only the people who are residing next door who had their concerns, we're also trying to accommodate the staff comments. So this is what the artist's rendition of what the hotel would look like from a distance. You can see the marina over in the east side of the property. There's another marina further down here. And these are some of the folks you may see be using these kinds of things. Now, there's also a benefit to the county from the hotel. The current property owners pay about $5,000 a year in taxes. If the hotel were to go in, they've estimated, and one of my clients is a real estate person who's had a lot of experience in this area, and he'll be up here to talk to you. But they've estimated that the total taxes that the county will receive in either ad valorem taxes or tourist development tax is about $225,299 a year versus $5,000 they're receiving now. And that is pretty much my presentation for now. I'd like to reserve the remaining 5 minutes for rebuttal if I have to.
Okay.
Can I ask you to put that first graphic up, if you don't mind? And I'll just put this out there as well. I'm inclined to support this. I just have a few questions. I appreciate the due diligence that appears to have been performed with respect to this. For those adjoining properties to the north, have you all spoken to each of those folks, or which of those folks have you actually spoken with? Okay. But I guess the prior time this was up, none of those folks to the north came here to express any sort of concern or... And then I just have one question for staff. And again, keep in mind, I'm inclined to support this. I just want to make sure I have everything well understood before we vote one way or the other. If we were to expand the community commercial to encompass the entire property and we have it set up as BU1, down the road, because I think a hotel would be great there, but down the road, what's the worst, in your subjective opinion, that we could expect to have within that particular zoning? And what's the most onerous use of that property if we were to change things?
Well, intensity is subjective, but if on a trip generation level, some of the highest intensity uses in BU1 are a fast food restaurant with a drive-through or a gas station, and all of those uses are permissible under the requested zoning classification. And I suppose you could say that a self-storage mini warehouse would be another intense use. It doesn't produce a lot of trips, but that is also a use in BU1.
Thank you. As I said, I'm inclined to support it unless the commissioner for District 3 is inclined otherwise. That's the way I'm going to stay with it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tafaya? Do you have questions for Mr. Knox?
Yeah, a couple, Madam Chair, and I think I may have a few after staff. There's a staff table that I think may have some questions that may be derived. But first and most importantly, Mr. Knox, that looks garnet and gold, your tie. So are you wearing a Seminole tie? Yeah, answer.
As much as I hate to say it, it does have those colors, but we beat them this year.
For Commissioner Lober's.
Will this now be 4-1?
Yeah, Commissioner Mr. Knox always wore orange and blue up here as our county attorney. So
Let's throw in go Knights, though.
okay, I'm all about it. Thank you very much for meeting with the homeowners association. And you have letters, I guess I have not seen. So you have letters from the president as well as the vice president.
I've got emails, and actually they're on my phone, so I brought them with me. So if you need to see them, I'll read them to you.
And can you tell us when you got those, please?
Yes, I got one this past Monday from the president, Gail DeBurco. It says, Scott, we would like to see the things you mentioned in the letter, and I'm speaking of the letter I had sent to the homeowners association agreeing to the things they wanted. In the binding development plan, we would like a copy before the meeting on Thursday, which we accomplished. We sent that out to them. And that's thank you, Gail DeBurco, President, Summit Cove. Then I've got one more.
That was, sorry, the president?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then I have another one from Lisa Hubert, who is the vice president. And what she says in an email is, looks like they are willing to cover all of our concerns.
Thank you very much. So all of the concerns that you mentioned that you received from those are now in the binding development plan. Is that
in
is
one
that
form
fair?
or fashion? Yes. Yes.
Okay.
There are two or three that didn't really relate to the site plan or the concept plan. It was more like global issues, but we didn't put those in there because they didn't relate to the development of the property per se.
Okay. So the question is this. I'm just getting it. We just got another copy, and I guess it's a response to the BDP that you gave staff. Staff gave you suggestions, and you tried to make the amendments.
Yes.
So the HOA clearly has not seen this new amended copy. Is that fair?
They've not seen the new amended copy because they probably, unless they get a copy of the staff comments, which I received today, and I responded to it.
Okay. So based on the previous, this is all. this should not be substantive. Is that fair, or will this be? I'm sorry, I just got this. I'm circling it, and I've noticed some. Let me ask you, the previous copy. First of all, how many copies of the BDP have there been?
This would be, let's see,
Revision number
I think
what?
this is like 2 or 3, or maybe 3, I think.
Okay, so let's go with revision 2. The last ones, I guess, the HOA had the ability to see. I imagine there's some folks from that. Will they concur with the president and the vice president sentiment? Is it your belief that that's a fair?
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to say. They may come up and say that they don't concur, but I can tell you that we went through and got a list that we put together, and we sent it in the way form of a letter, which you have in your materials, and every one of those items is in the BDP as they requested. And we put them in almost verbatim from the letter.
Okay. And one more question. Do you know how many, or maybe a couple, do you know how many units there are in the HOA? So I haven't read the HOA document.
Approximately 88. 84.
80. With your knowledge of HOAs, would 2 votes, be it the president and the vice president, indicate support of the HOA?
I can't say that a vice president or president would speak in behalf of the whole HOA, but there were about 20 people at that meeting out of the 88 owners that were there. So, and they took a vote after I left, so I don't know what they did, what they voted on, or what they actually did. But after I was there, I got the 2 emails that I talked about.
Okay, so to the best of your knowledge, the HOA will stand up here after, and since you capitulated on all of their issues, they will most likely be in favor of the revisions that you made.
I hope they were, but I just can't tell what's in people's minds. So
Okay.
I know there was some opposition at the meeting we were at. There were a few folks who expressed opposition.
But one last question, just clarity. I think you've already mentioned it. This copy that was just handed out, that was not in the packet, correct?
That was not in the packet because I couldn't respond to it till today.
I get it. I absolutely get it. So we're just seeing this. So the HOA has yet to see this. Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Knox.
Yes.
Of the items that you responded to, I guess, from the staff comments, would you consider these items even more restrictive or more favorable to the homeowners? Like, because I see that there's a wall. There is making sure they have adequate turn radius for past the gate that they wanted, and you're not allowing for extended stay. So if anything, these are additional protections to the HOA, correct?
I think actually one of the protections was the 8-foot wall that we had agreed to, and staff seemed to think that you had to waive the 6-foot requirement in order to get to the 8-foot. But I don't necessarily think that's true because we're being more restrictive by going up with an 8-foot wall. So I think that's something that we had agreed to, and we would do that.
Okay. Because maybe just for, record's sake, and maybe to the homeowners that are here, could you just briefly summarize the additional things that were added in Commissioner Tobias' concerns about this new document?
Yes, we could. In fact, I'll just go down.
I can read them, but I'd rather them come from you since this is your document.
All right. Let me go down the list here. Okay, this is all on page 2 of the original document, which I think was the one that the Homeowners Association have. So in the first change we made was to paragraph F, where we made it clear that we're talking about an 8-foot wall where a wall is required by the county code. So staff seems to believe it would be the entire property. If that's what's required, that's what we'll do. The second change I made was in subparagraph H, where we're talking about the turnaround. And the staff was concerned that we should be following a exhibit that's set forth in the zoning regulations about the sizing of that turnaround. And it was, they were concerned we didn't have enough right-of-way. In fact, we do have enough right-of-way if we look at the entire piece of property that's owned by the Homeowners Association. However, I pointed out to them that the exhibit they were talking about was something that applied to residential subdivisions, not to condominiums. And when they came back with their comments, they added something about having a turnaround that was at least the length adequate to allow appropriate turning movements by a truck with a landscape trailer. And they also asked that turnaround templates be provided, which I said at the time of the application for site plan approval. So that's the language I put in the binding development plan to conform to what the staff had put in their comments. And the last change we made was on item J, where the staff pointed out that hotels were defined to include any stay that's less than 90 days. We had put something in about saying weekly rentals, that we would not do any weekly rentals without coming back to this board for a BDP approval. And so I changed it to conform to what the staff said, to add developers agreed that any change of use from a hotel to a facility allowing stays of over 90 days or apartments will require a revision to the BDP, which means coming back before the board. And one of the other things I added, that not on this document, but it was part of the other document that you have in front of you in your materials, was something that was concerning to the staff also. And they were concerned about the enforcement of these provisions because they really deal with property that's not subject to the zoning. So what we did was we put a provision in the BDP saying that the county would have standing to enforce it if they chose to do so, which is it's pretty common to see that in deed restrictions where people have private arrangements between two private parties, but they'll put something in there saying the county can enforce those also. So that's what we've done here.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to go through the comments. It'll be Daryl Leonard and then Gail DeBurco. Okay, it'll be Gail DeBurco and then Daryl Leonard.
Hi, I'm Gail DeBurco, owner of property in Summit Cove. I'm also the president. And I first would like to address Mr. Knox's comment. Yes, I did send an email requesting that it be put into the binding development plan just to make it legal rather than just a letter. But the reason I was requesting that is because we, as Mr. Toby pointed out, we cannot speak, the president or vice president cannot speak for the entire community. According to our docs, we have to be able to take a vote. And that was, I can't present anything to the association for votes until I have a legal document. I couldn't just go on a letter that he sent us. And so I requested that. I am going to request that this be tabled for that being one of the main reasons. But we didn't even receive the document that he just suggested to you just now until I was just handed it just now. But we received it Tuesday around noon, which did not give us enough time to get it to facilitate distribution to our owners, for them to look at it and have input in on it. We are required to take a vote on it. Many of our residents also speak French, and so all of our documents have to be translated into anything we send out is translated into French. So we've not had adequate time to even begin to do any of this. So that's why I'm asking for it to be tabled. After Mr. Knox left, some of the residents felt more comfortable talking without him being there and raised some additional concerns and questions. There was a meeting held afterwards with some of the homeowners. I do want to correct that there was only 13 residents there. We have 84 units. There was only 13 residents at the meeting. So that isn't even a half of the residents to even be able to have put input into it. So we do have additional things. We would like to be able to take the vote, and we would like to be able to welcome Mr. Knox to come back after we have these other issues that we are concerned about being addressed.
Would you like to state what those issues are now?
And I think we have quite a few people. As you can see, we have a large contingency here tonight because they are concerned. I do know that some of them are concerned about lighting, the height of the building. So you have lots of different things. But again, we only had 13 people at the meeting. A lot of residents are not there yet. They're seasonal residents are coming in. And with the holidays, we've got a lot of residents gone. So we really want to be able to reach out to get input from more people. and want to be able to send this document out to get a vote and to see what and maybe when they see it, they'll have other ideas. Some of them don't even know what's even going on because they're in Canada. So there's no way for them to even I mean, it's been put in the minutes when we've had meetings, we've been putting in the minutes, but they have not seen anything on this BDP.
So they don't live here year-round?
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Okay.
But we want to be able to offer the ones that don't live year-round the same opportunities that the people that live there year-round. It is their property. What's one of the things I was going to, like I said, we'd be happy to meet with him again to go over additional things once we find out what some of them are. And we've got lots of residents that want to speak on some of their concerns.
Okay.
But I did want to clarify that my asking him to put that was not my approval by any stretch of the imagination. It was just that we needed a legal document to be able to give to our homeowners as wanting it to be available to them to approve.
Commissioner Tafaya?
Thank you. And I understand I hadn't seen that email, but I would have, in all honesty, maybe understood it the way Mr. Knox did.
And I apologize if he understood that. That was not, I was just
get
asking.
He's an
I was just
attorney.
asking for it.
You're not. I understand. My question and I don't speak for the board, but if we were to extend you an amount of time, I did not know a large percentage of your folks speak French. How long would it take to get a majority of the HOA to vote one way or another to provide some sort of direction?
Well,
how long do you believe?
Well, if we just go with the BDP that's presented right now, the new one, which I still don't have an official copy of, but it would have to be translated, and then it has to be, we have to send it out to, we don't have email voting in place, so it had to be sent to Canada, which takes, turnaround is quite lengthy on that. To get it up there and to get it back, unfortunately, I would say probably 6-8 weeks, probably from top to be able to get everything done and get the votes back and everything. I'm guessing. I don't know an exact time frame.
Okay, so I think our next board meeting, and I don't speak for the board. I'm just questioning. Our next board meeting is the beginning of February. Is that right?
Yeah, February 7th.
February 7th. That's in that time frame. If we were to do something in that nature, would that
We would put out every effort that we could to get it accomplished.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pritchett?
Yeah, just for expedience sake, I wanted to ask Mr. Knox a question. If we were to table this to February, is that going to have a harsh impact on your project?
Yeah, there is a sewer issue out there, as we all know. And one of the reason that is an issue is because there's limited capacity at the Barefoot Bay system. And it's kind of a first come, first serve thing with that, and you have to pay a fee to reserve your sewer. My client has done that in part. They have more that they can get, and they wanted to see what the result of this is going to be before they do that, obviously. And that's kind of where we are. So and it's not very much left. It's enough to serve this particular use, but it may not be enough if somebody else comes in and gets it.
Thank you, sir. I'm not willing to table then.
Mr. Knox, I don't mean to make you keep getting up and getting down again. Can you just verify for the record that you did all proper notifications and meetings with the residents and that you made every effort to reach out?
We did.
And that we could go through the list in totality of the number of things where you provided them a gate, and essentially making them a gated community, and an 8-foot wall. I mean, I think that I'll reserve my comment till the end, but I think the developers made many concessions to appease the people that did come out. Now, I don't know that we could be responsible or that we have any developer be responsible for people who don't speak English and don't live here full time year round. I don't know if that's a fair burden to put on anybody that's trying to develop their property. So I'm not going to support tabling it either. I mean, we can listen to the rest of the public comments if you want. Or Mr. Lober?
Just a quick question. I'm just wondering what Commissioner Tobias thinks with respect to tabling it, whether he's in favor or not at this point.
My opinion is this. I think the board was pretty clear that we wanted, and you didn't sit on that board, I understand at the time, that we wanted to get the input from the citizens, and I think that was the direction and the intention that this board went forward with. And we just got the binding development plan, the addition to the binding development plan, literally handed to us 12 minutes ago. So I don't know. I'm circling. I saw some of that stuff. There's words. I'm not an attorney, but I saw words like some, and you know, red flags go up when I see, you know, some buffering. I don't think it's all that specific. And this, I left aside. I think staff is going to have some issues. I think there's an entire table here with some issues that I didn't want to touch on because I think staff can touch on the many, I mean, it's 2 pages of issues here with the BDP. This isn't me. This is what staff is going to. So I think before I make a decision on whether or not to table, I think it's probably fair for staff to explain many issues that they saw with the last BDP and ask them if they've had the ability to see if those have been addressed. I mean, I hate to ask this on you, but can you make that determination in 12 minutes whether these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different issues that were outlined have been addressed in that one change that we just got? I can't.
Thank you.
I do have questions that remain, and some of those are even with some of the information that you've spoken about regarding the improvements on adjacent property. I'm not spotting the language that allows for that to occur, and I don't have clarity on what language that is that allows that. I don't see that in this document we were handed today.
Madam Chair, which item which item was that on your table that you're discussing?
Condition 2H is
2H.
improvements on adjacent property. They were described here today as being within right-of-way. They are not within right-of-way. They're within privately owned property that we cannot control whether or not the applicant submits improvements on that property when they submit their site plan. They don't even have the authority to submit plans to make those improvements, so I don't know how we can encumber this property to make those improvements. And he spoke about inserting language that allows for that, but can you call my attention to that
Yes,
language?
it's in G. What it says, and it was in the last version of it, is in addition with Summit Cove Association consent, meaning we just can't do it because we want to do it, the developer owner agrees to place some buffering landscaping on the association property where desirable. And that relates to a concern that well, it's 2 things. My client had agreed to put buffering on both sides of the property the wall he's going to put up. And the comments we heard from the folks at the meeting where they were concerned that we'd put deciduous trees or something up there where the branches or the palm fronds or the leaves would be falling into their driveway. So we said we wouldn't do that. So what we really want to do is work with the association to get the landscaping the way they want it on their side of the property, and that's kind of where we're going with that.
So just in response to that one condition alone, some buffering where desirable, those things, we don't know what that is. Those things can be defined by meeting with the neighbors and telling us what they are. It's not in that condition, and when the site plan comes in, I don't know what to ask for. So there are still some concerns with some of this language.
Thank you. And I do want to point out, when did your office receive the last, not the one that was just handed to you 12 minutes ago? When did your office receive, I guess, version 2?
We received that on Tuesday and ceased all other activities in response.
I just want to commend you for your ability to go through that in such short time, get a response back, and even give the applicant the ability to turn something around. I wish you wouldn't have done it as quickly because now that's placing the burden on the board, I guess. But I certainly
We did
appreciate
have the
your-
right to request to table, and we did not do that. So-
I appreciate you making every accommodation for the applicant, but and drawing this table up for us to have.
If I may raise an issue of defense, the meeting that we held with the home association wasn't until November 27th because they couldn't get their homeowners association together until that time. So, well, we asked for a time before that, and we got the 27th. That's when we showed up. So, whether or not that's when I was told to come, that's when I came. And then we also didn't get staff comments back on that until either today or yesterday. I think it was today, this morning. So we had to respond to that quickly. That's why you have it today. So I did what I could.
And Mr. Knox, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this to put you on the spot, but in reality, you could, I mean, the board asked you and your commissioner asked you, or the commission in this district asked you to work with the homeowners, and you worked with the homeowners. In reality, you're not required by law to provide all these extra things, correct?
No.
I mean, you're trying to accommodate some of their concerns, and you're trying to...
We try to address every one of their concerns.
Right.
And the gate is kind of a big concern. So
Commissioner Pritchett?
Mr. Knox, would it be possible for you guys to table to the 18th, a regular meeting? We have another county commission meeting in a week and a half. Would that work?
I think Eugene Lamando, owner, Tropical. Okay, I think we're getting a little bit off track a little bit. These are wonderful people, but they're the one side neighbor. We have other neighbors. We have the letter in front of you from the strip mall from Corky Preet and Amy Preet. I believe some of the commissioners know them. Wonderful, wonderful people. We also have the owners of the marina right across the street. Now, as for the buffering, that comes in the permitting section. How much, that comes in an architectural, landscape architectural plan. So we can say how many more plants, how many less plants. Just like you had a previous case in Merritt Island. Now, it really goes down to the permitting process and so on and so forth. And that's where that would be taking place. What color the wall and so on and so forth. I think you brought up a point in the Merritt Island case where it says, well, do the houses get painted green and the roofs and so on and so forth. And sir, you're right. So that's why I'm saying here, we went through all the things. We have the owners of the marina here. We have a letter from IPRI. These are wonderful people. We were there before that area was even built. So we have been good neighbors. Mr. Cox went out there. And I implore you to understand that we're trying to bring value to the area. We have the ability and the awareness and the ability to bring sewers. We have the capacity. We have it. We have the letters from
Yes, sir, I'm sorry, we're getting a little off track.
Okay.
Let me just throw this out one more time. Is it possible to table this till December the 18th without harming the project?
No, we have no, see.
Okay, because here's my thought on that. I'm sorry, so that'll come in a minute. Is I think you've done due diligence. I think you've lowered the height. I think the turnaround next door was a little much, but hey, if you're willing to do it. So I'm probably comfortable, but since Commissioner Tobias has some discomfort, and if it's possible to just do this, take a week and a half, tighten this up with our staff, that would give me a little bit more comfort too. But I think if you're willing to do that and it's possible, we can bring it back to our regular meeting without harming you, and then we're able to do those things. So if that's possible, that would be something.
Would that be your direction? Yes, very good, thank you.
So if I may, Madam Chair, I know you're still going to do discussion, but when we're ready, I would just like to make a motion to go ahead and table to the 18th.
I'll go ahead and second that, pending the outcome of discussion.
I have a motion by Commissioner Pritchett and a second by Commissioner Lober. Is there any further discussion from the rest of the board? Commissioner Tobias?
Yeah, I would vote for that. I think the folks out here probably would be best served waiting for the new BDP, the clean copy, because right now I think, I mean, you're more than welcome to speak, but right now we'd be working off an old document that may or may not change here before the 18th. So I'm wondering if we also could give direction, hopefully, of this BDP. I mean, are you that we could get a copy back here in pretty short order, so we're not giving it to them the day before like we did last time?
Yeah, I will send the clean version of what I just gave you to you, as each of you and the staff, as well as Ms. DeBurco and her board of directors.
I appreciate it, but I don't think it's yet clean because I still don't think, I think staff still has some issues even with the recent document. Is that fair?
Right. Implying that we can work with adjacent property owners during the site plan process is not something that we can do. We cannot negotiate those terms during that process. This is the time to do that. So that kind of language, is unenforceable. Another thing that was brought to our attention was one of the conditions obligates us, or the developer, to build the hotel in conformance with the concept plan, that we would need a 20-foot landscape buffer added to that concept plan if that were to be allowed. So we don't have very little time between now and the 18th. Those materials are due tomorrow, so I won't have another chance to give that feedback, so we'll need to.
We'll do what we can do before we get there.
Do you think you'll have time to meet with staff? I mean, can we make sure?
Well, I assume staff will go over this tomorrow and get me comments tomorrow, and I can respond to those quickly, I think. I don't think there's really a lot of difference from what staff is looking for.
But if we're
and what
talking
we
about a
did.
20-foot landscape buffer and an 8-foot wall, I don't know.
I don't know where the 20-foot landscape buffer came from, but we'll talk to staff.
Hopefully you guys can hammer that out and get that information to the homeowners. As much as I would, like I said, like to wait until, things get translated and they vote and they make sure everybody votes. I don't know that gives the applicant, as Commissioner Pritchett said, due diligence, and I don't think that that's fair to the applicant at this point. So, and I would encourage either, just as from a homeowners association standpoint, have a spokesperson, have somebody, have your own meeting, if you have to, have small meetings and gather that information and get it to Mr. Knox. And, if there's anything additional, you've already met with them, but if there's anything additional that's going to significantly change what you're going to do, because there's going to be people that just don't want it flat out. But if there's something you can do to ease the pain, which I know you're working to do, then I'm sure you'll make it work.
Okay.
And I thank staff for. So we have a motion on the table to the 18th. And a second.
Second.
You want to say anything else?
I just wanted to echo what's already been said. And again, I have an undergraduate degree in French language and literature, so believe me, I have empathy for those who speak French. But all the same, I don't know that it's fair to put that kind of a burden on developers or on folks involved in a project like this. I certainly appreciate staff's turnaround with respect to how quickly they've been able to address things. I understand everyone's doing what they can within reason here, and I just ask they continue to do that to whatever degree they're capable of.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And just for the public's sake, I deferred on comment because things could change. So you would be commenting on something that we're not taking any action on. So it's sort of, an unwritten policy, and we do it not to waste your time, obviously, but to have productive conversation and to make sure that we can address your concerns. Mm-hmm. No, that's if it had to go back to zoning again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a morning meeting.
Yes, and that's a morning meeting at 9 a.m. Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. And I thank you guys for coming out.
Yeah. Madam Chair, would you take second action on the second item, on item 11?
Table it also? Want
For
to
both
table it
items.
also? Yeah, make a motion to table item 11.
And I'd second that as well.
Motion by Commissioner Pritchett to table item number 11, second by Commissioner Lober. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Oh, Mr. Toby.
We have public comments. Mr. Tovey? And he's going to get extra time because his card was missed. Are you? I'm starving. I'm going to eat. I think a Wawa BLT. Wawa BLT. And Mr. Tovey, because, come on up, we didn't have your card beforehand, before we passed the public comments thing earlier, only because there was a lot of people filling out cards. So that's no error of yours. So if you want extra time, sir, you've got it, because it was an error on our part. So take the time you need. If it gets way too long, does that sound fair?
Charles Tovey, 2555 Roberts Road, Melbourne. I'm not prepared for all that, and I'm trying to remember what I came here 3 hours ago to do. And as usual, I'm the one that has to suffer people's mistakes and overlook their things, and that's fine. That's part of my life. I keep these, and I have them available just so you know that I'll talk about anything and give my opinion, but I don't out of respect for everybody else and things. I did make a few diagrams. They're crude, but I have a lot of information, and if you'll create a file to store it in for further effort, or you can throw it in a trash can, like I said to the other commissioners. And I'm still recovering from post-traumatic corruption stress disorder from all the things that have been allowed to happen and what I've experienced. So I'm not going to be the nicest person in the world. I'm a serious person, and after this matter is finished in the lagoon and the things that I've been working for, then I'll be chummy and talk to people and idle gossip. Madam Chair, my humble apologies for the comment I made about my name. After meditation, one thing is that it does say print. I did not print my name, and my handwriting is not the most legible. And also, it wasn't directed personally to you. It was directed in general, and I'm a general practitioner, so if I don't voice anybody's name, it's not actually directed to them personally. And there's other people that I have to be involved with that don't know my name correctly. So I thought it was a good opportunity to present that. And although I'm burning up my time, if I stay alive and have these issues, I'll be back to comment about them. Status is important, but it has never been my priority. There are hundreds of things I care about more than looking good for my neighbors. I was there first, and how I'm here now is beyond me, but that's okay. The items I disclosed, and I don't have any more things to discuss right at this time. I do, but I'm not prepared for it, so I'll be at the next meeting, whatever that may entail, and if there's public comment, I do have I thought I've been earning my right to public comment and to go into other areas and things, and I've had a hard road, and no one's helped me. It's been since, 2004 they encroached on my property, and never mind, I'm rambling about stuff, which I've said before. I will be providing more information about the lagoon and the projects that I've been working on for over a decade now, and it's at the end of the elephant. So if you don't understand what I said tonight or last time or years ago, if you put them all together, you might see picture that's not presented at immediate times. Have a nice evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Could you hang tight for 1 sec? I just have a quick question. If you submit anything in the future, would you mind, and I'm just requesting, you can do whatever you'd like, but would you mind printing in block? Because I read it, but it just took me kind of
Printing
a
in
little
block.
more effort to read it than I was hoping to expend. The handwriting was just a little bit hard to read.
Well, I understand that, and I didn't expect everybody to observe it. And actually, no one's paid attention for all these years, and it's public record. And that's why I come up here, because I've been stating these issues, and nobody's made any kind of effort that I know of.
Sir, if you're willing to spend 3 hours sitting here, I'd like to at least read what you submit. Whether we take action on it or not, I can't promise you one way or the other, but I think you deserve that much sitting here for 3 hours.
Well, that's fine, and I could use up the whole 3 hours have I given the opportunity and the expectation that I was going to be given more time. And I'm going to make an appointment with your office to disclose all this information, as I'd like to disclose all the information to everybody. I'm at the end of the elephant, and I will be disclosing it to the senators. I called and gave them a copy of it years ago. And I have more information that I haven't been able to access yet, and I'm trying to compose all that information and submit it to each one of your offices, as well as the senators and the congressmen and the newspapers and all these other interested lagoon-friendly people. Thank you for your time, and again, I mean no personal disrespect towards anybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And I have nothing else. No more public comments. So we'll move into board reports. Go ahead.
No report.
Ms. Bentley?
No report.
Commissioner Pritchett?
No report.
Commissioner Lober?
I could sit here in silence for an hour just to do that to everyone, but I won't do that. No, I have nothing to report this evening.
Commissioner Tobias?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This will be brief. On July 27th, I submitted a simple public records request to a state agency. I did so in my professional capacity, but made sure to include the disclaimer that I was acting on behalf, that I was not acting on behalf of the board. To say that as reasonable time has elapsed is pretty much a gross understatement. So I'm requesting that the board authorize the county attorney's office to send a demand letter for a response from a state agency. According to the county attorney's office, this would incur about 30 minutes to an hour of staff time. So I'd like to make a motion to ask the county attorney's office to send that demand letter for the public records request, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Lober?
Could I just ask you, even for a very Cliff Note type of a version in terms of what the request pertained to or who it was directed to?
Yes, Enterprise, Florida.
Okay, I'll go ahead and second.
So I have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Tobias, a second by Commissioner Lober. No discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
No report.
And I just want to say thank you to staff. Thank you for enduring, and I appreciate everything that you do to help us. I mean, reading through some of those minutes, Miss Erin, you're my hero, given the amount of things given the amount of things and how you tried to steer that conversation. I really appreciate everything you do and all of staff, because I know that it can be difficult to work with so many entities and trying to appease everybody. So thank you very much. And seeing none, meeting adjourned.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.